So while you guys are finishing up your word search, so you can create a word search generator for any kind of lesson or activity you're going to do. So as kids are coming in, you can have one of those, and you're just starting to familiarize them with the vocabulary. But it's a fun little activity to do too. But they're free. I made it for us just yesterday, so you might want to make them a little bigger because children might not be able to see those.
I thought for a second you might have deliberately made it real small as like some type of
It's strategic, yeah. That's no, it just printed that way. So I was going to say a heads up on that. We'll make sure that when you print it, you want it to be a little bit bigger. Let me get the. That one's pretty tough. Did somebody else have one? Yeah. Anybody else have one?
Thank you.
Get all y'all? Okay. All right, so I'll start while you guys are finishing up with your word search. We'll go back here to the beginning. And so thank you for being here today for co-teaching. So we're going to talk about co-teaching, and then we're going to talk about specially designed instruction. There's a few things I'll share with you on the beginning of this. The first thing is that you have a book. So there's one that specially designed instruction and co-teaching, and that's yours to keep. So you should have some materials there. On your desk, you will also have a true-false. We're going to use that in a minute for some activities we're going to do, so you can use that true-false. So you should have those materials there. An index card, pen, and those kinds of things. Pretty handy. And if you don't, somebody will help you with those. The second thing is, and I'll probably get the eyeball roll on this one, but we're going to move around some today. I remember the other day, we were in a training, Brenda and I were at a training, and they said, you're going to have to move around. And I said, for real, I just got all this stuff fixed up and organized, and then I had to move. So, but we are, because we don't want to sit all day. You don't want to listen to me all day long, and you want to get up and move. So we will be moving, so I'm going to give you a little heads up on that. You can keep your space, but we're going to do some stations, and so those are on the perimeter of the room, but we will be moving, so just fair warning. The other thing is, if you've not had breakfast, there's some breakfast refreshments out here. There's 2 restrooms here, but if you go back out and turn right for where you came in, there's 2 restrooms that have multiple stalls in them. So that just, we'll take breaks and we'll have a lunch, but just go as you need to go. Lunch is catered, and we use a place called Miller's, and they always do a really good job. And there's chicken casserole and potato casserole and I don't know what all. Really good strawberry dessert, salad. So we have a really good lunch. So you'd all just help yourself to snacks and refreshments out there. I told them to have lunch ready at 11:30. So we'll break at 11:30 for lunch because we don't like cold food. So we'll make sure we stop at 11:30 for lunch. And then I guess that's about it. So did I give everybody just a few minutes? Anybody questions before we start? Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is move to here and make sure everybody got to sign in. So if you didn't, and you can see them on the screens back there, so make sure everybody had a chance to sign in. So if you want to continue to work on your crossword, Chastity will come around, just hold them up, Chastity will come around and pick those up as we get going. Okay, so let's go back here. Here's another little fun thing to do with kids as you come in, or any kind of time you're working together. Let's take a look at that first one. What do you think this one means? Let's do these puzzles together real quickly.
Head over heels.
Head over heels. Good. All right.
Growing economy.
Growing economy.
I'm sorry, I'll do it.
All right.
Accurate.
All right. All right. Anybody figured that one out yet? Huh? They are in a row.
From A to Z.
From A to Z. What about this one down here?
Forgive and forget.
Forgive and forget.
Red in face. Red in the face.
Yeah. Red in face, yeah. And
In between jobs.
in between jobs, right? So those are another fun little activity. So you're going to see that all through the day we're going to do little activities that you want to take back to your classroom, right? So you can do those kinds of things depending on what you're teaching. The crossword is another strategy you can use for your classroom too, right? As kids come in, for transition times, as fun little activities to work on the vocabulary. Okay, So the next slide here, I just want you all to meet our team. So we are the KVEC Special Ed Regional Technical Assistance Center. And I'm Dionne Bates. Over here is Miss Brenda Combs. We've got Miss Chastity Craft. And I forgot, so I work on implementation and improvement, and Brenda does compliance and special education. Chastity's our literacy specialist. Dr. Will Cayeton in the back, he's our transition, higher ed. We've got Stephanie Kidd, who's our math consultant. She's not with us today. And we got Mr. Denny May, who's due process, and then we got Doug Smith. But that's the KVEC Special Ed Regional Technical Assistance team. So that's our SERTEC team, and I just want to let you all kind of see who we are. And you'll see those people around the room today. And they'll be here with us as we work and do some co-teaching and some stations and some learning together. All right, next thing we're going to do is do another activity. So in front of you, you should have an index card. And one side of the index card has some stuff on it, so flip it over to the other side, the blank side. So there should be some markers at your table. We're going to fill out this one right here because we're going to use this to do some activities. So right in the middle of that card, put your name. You can use the markers that's there. You can pencil, whatever you want to use. But just take a couple of minutes and do your name. Now, what do you think about your favorite back-to-school activity? Is it buying school supplies? Is it having all your trays with your pencils and your paper all organized in your classroom? Is it your crayons? Because I always think about the smell of the crayons, right, when on the first day of school. And then your favorite place to travel. What your favorite food is and your favorite movie. While we're working, did anyone have another crossword they wanted to put in for the drawing that they finished? Put your name on it, and we'll put it in the drawing. Thanks. Anybody else? No one? Any more calls? All right, Chastity, we'll let somebody draw. Shake them up good, and we'll let somebody draw. They're going to win this KVEC Cup. Okay, so you're going to need your card in a little bit, so when we get up and move around, you'll have your card. Anybody need another minute for that, or they got it? Are we good? All right. So you'll hold on to that card. We're going to use it in a minute when we move around and we pair up. So, all right. So we're talking about today with co-teaching. We're going to talk about why do we do that? How does that work in our classroom? How do we design and plan lessons around that? What are some good models? And so we're going to practice those things, and we're going to go through that. So on your desk, you should have a true and false. Right? So I'm going to ask you 2 questions to kind of learn about who our group is. So I'm going to say, I am a regular ed teacher. Hold your sign up. Or is it true or false? Regular ed teacher. All right. So I'm a special education teacher. All right, perfect. All right. I teach elementary school. Okay. I teach middle school. Okay. And I teach high school.
Technically, I'm also a hearing impairment teacher.
All right, thank you. Did y'all look around the room, see who was regular ed teachers and special? So we have a great mix of both. So that's a fantastic day. Because sometimes we get regular ed teachers and special ed teachers in the training different times, and we don't have both perspectives. And so it's wonderful that we have everybody here. And we have all of our districts, lots of different districts represented today. So we're glad that you're all here. All right, so we're going to talk about that. The first thing, we're just going to think about, why do we co-teach? There's a reason we do it. It's not that we just want to make our lives a little bit harder, but we co-teach because, well, it's the right thing to do for kids. It's a better way to get more students, to impact more students efficiently. We can talk about the different models of co-teaching, and then we're going to talk about what strategies do we use? How do we plan and design that? And how do we do that? And integrate specially designed instruction. So if you're a regular ed teacher, you're trying to figure out how do we get that, how do we make sure that all the needs are met of the students. If you're a special ed teacher, you're trying to think, how in the world do I meet my IEP, what I'm supposed to do for my services through a co-teaching classroom. So those are things we're going to talk about today. And then we're going to say, how do we check, see if what we're doing is working? And so, this statistic comes from the U.S. Department of Education, and you may have seen this before, but 64% of our students that have a disability spend 80% or more of their day in the regular ed classroom, right? So even if we are pulling students to the resource room for services, they're still spending, most of them, at least 2/3 of our IEP kids are still spending the majority of the day in the general ed classroom, right? So that's why we started co-teaching, because we've got to touch those kids some way. We've got to deliver those services. And how do we do that? And we don't take them out of that regular ed classroom. And I'll tell you a story, and I don't mind to tell it. I'm not proud of it. But when I first started teaching special education years ago, I'm starting my 28th year this year. But when I started teaching special education a long time ago, there was a teacher that taught down the hallway from me. And she was a regular ed teacher. And she was mean. And she didn't like my special education kids. And she kicked us out every day. And I allowed that because I didn't know any better. I was young and I didn't know any better. And so every day we went to reading class down in the resource room. Guess what we missed? She was 3rd grade. Guess what we missed? Reading instruction. So who needed it the most? The IEP kids, right? My kids that we got kicked out every day. And so, since then, when I finally realized what a mistake we were making, I've been on a mission to stop doing that, right? And share that. Because it's not the right thing to do. I took those kids down there and I tried as hard as I could. I taught as hard as I could every single day. But could I make up for what they missed in the standards? I could not. I couldn't make up for it because guess what I was teaching them? What was in their IEP, right? So it's at least 2 grade levels below. So I'm teaching them reading about 2 grade levels below, and we're never giving them access to grade level standards. And so I always think about that. You always have these things that you remember in your career, and that was one of those things I always said, I don't ever want to make that mistake again. And so we can do this by co-teaching. So I could have stayed in the classroom, worked in that classroom, helped all the kids, and then pulled my kids down for resource time, right? So they got the benefit of both of those things. Because only what's going to happen is if our special ed kids never get those grade level standards, that gap is going to continue to grow, right? If we keep them down here working on letters and sounds for the rest of their life, and everybody else is progressing, kids are missing. And so in order to keep all of our kids, not just our IEP kids, but all of our kids, our GAP kids, those kids, because we have had a pandemic and those kids have missed some instruction, how do we catch all those kids up? And this is a way we can do it. And we can do it, and it can be fun, and it can be engaging for kids, and it can be a good learning experience, and for teachers. So it's a good thing. So if a child has an IEP and we decide as an ARC, so whether you're regular ed or special ed, you're in an ARC meeting and you're going to be making decisions about what kind of co-teaching that child needs. So we say in that IEP that this kid needs co-teaching. Well, if we do not, and we pull them out down to the resource room or we don't serve them, we are not implementing their IEP, right? We're not doing that. And that's a compliance issue. And then the other thing is, if we're saying if it's not delivered in that both teachers in that classroom, we're not implementing an IEP. So if we say co-teaching when we're having those ARCs and we believe that that child needs to be in that regular ed setting with support, that's what we have to do, right? And so we've been learning a long time about how do we do co-teaching the best, right? Because I can remember we were working on this a long time ago when I first started. Probably Brenda's got a lot more years of experience than I do, and we've been working on this a long time.
Younger than her.
And Brenda's younger, she just got more experience. But we've been doing this a long time, right? And we got to make sure we get, so it's evolved and we're getting better at it. But we still have to think about, we're really being non-compliant, right? So if you think about a time you sit in an ARC meeting and you talk about the services the child will get and where that location will be at for that service, if we say that it's going to be in that co-teaching, that's where we need to make sure it's happening at, right? And what that looks like. So that kind of helps us just to understand, we're not just doing it because our school set that schedule up that way, but we have to do it because it's for the right thing to do for each child that service is for. And so if we co-teach, it helps those kids that have an IEP because we're teaching them, we're meeting that requirement. We have a much smaller teacher-student ratio if there's 2 of us in there. And then all that support that kids need, those targeted supports can be delivered through those different strategies. So the other thing is we have to have everybody engaged, right? And we want them to have groups. And I'll tell you another story. I talked down the hallway with a lady, she's a social studies teacher. And I could almost see her classroom across from my classroom. And every time I walked by her room, all my IEP kids were in the back of the room sitting with the aide. Every single time I walked by that classroom. So those kids had to sit in the back with their aide, and they were never part of that lesson. They had to sit in the back of the room. So we'd modify or adjust their test, and what she would do for their test was she'd mark out 2 of the answers. So we'd have 2 to choose from. Well, guess what happened at the end of the year when we got to assessment? They want 2 to choose from, and how many they up? 4. We never taught them we never taught them a single strategy. But every time we walked down that hallway, those kids were sitting in the back of the room, right? So that's not flexible grouping. That's not including them. And have you ever had somebody have a really good idea and you heard it and you think, oh, that is brilliant. Well, what if you never could hear those good ideas from other kids or other people, right? We get the opportunity to do that all the time, to work together. But what about kids that never hear that are working or functioning on that same level and they never have those conversations? We got to have them opportunities to interact, right? We give them opportunities. We got to give them a lot of time to practice and have practice turns. So our kids, they're MMD or have an intellectual disability, they need the most practice turns, right? They need instruction and then practice and instruction. And guess who gets the least amount? They do, right? Because they can't hardly keep up. They're sometimes they'll be disrupted and get in trouble and get sent to the office. But those are the kids that need it the most. So by using co-teaching, we can divide those kids up, and we don't have to. They can have more opportunities because it's a little more manageable. And then we can always give them some feedback. So on this slide here, and you've got a handout on your table that's got the co-teaching. But this is the co-teaching. These are the 6 strategies, and those are endorsed by Marilyn Friend, and that's the author of the book that you got. So all the resources that you'll need for the co-teaching strategies are written in there. But we used to train it about the 6 co-teaching strategies. Well, I don't train that anymore about the 6 co-teaching strategies. And I'll tell you why. 3 of them are not very effective, right? So we don't want to waste our time on the other 3. So what's the biggest bang for our buck? How can we touch kids more efficiently and effectively and get them access to grade level standards and meet their IEP goals? And then how do we reduce the teacher ratio size, and how do we keep moving forward? So we have team teaching, and that's just 2 teachers teaching together. And we used to do that a lot, and there's not a thing wrong with that when you're doing an introduction to a lesson. But the team teaching percentage of that shouldn't be the majority of your time. That's only about 10% of the time that you do team teaching. Now parallel teaching, and we're going to experience that one today, that's when you divide the group and you have 2 different groups and 2 teachers are teaching. Now that one is to be used much more often. It's about 30% of the time. Station teaching is when you have each teacher is running a station and they're leading that. And we're going to go into each one of these, but that 2 teachers are leading a station, and that's one of the most effective ones. And so we had Mike LaFavors come. He is His school is the highest performing school in the state. And he comes and talks to us at KVEC. And we all, in the special ed department, we get real interested in it. They chose, in their district, station teaching and parallel teaching. And that's the only two teaching strategies they use. And they're the highest performing district in the state. And their students are performing. And so that's what they did. Instead of trying everything, they said, okay, what's one or two things that we can do that's the most effective? So station teaching is another one. So you could put a little star by parallel, a little star by station, and then alternative teaching. And that's when one teacher's teaching the big group, and then they pull a small group to the back for an alternative teaching model. Or they're giving them extra practice. But also, you can use that one when you're working with your gifted kids, right, for enrichment. So there's all kinds of things. And we're going to go into each one of those three. So the one teach, one observe. How often do you think that should be used? Anybody got an idea? Very rarely, right? Very rarely. So this one's good. So you got a kid that's a behavior issue, got some behavior issues in the classroom, or they have trouble getting on task. Somebody might record for them how long it takes them to get on task. So they're observing, right? So that should last, 5 or 10 minutes, 15 minutes at the most that we're recording data. And should you do that every day? No. Only when you're collecting data or you're doing progress monitoring or something like that would you ever use that. And then you have the one teach, one assist. And I call that the pointer strategy and the coffee drinking strategy. So I worked with this guy, and he carried this coffee cup. And I tell this every time, if you ever heard me train this, I probably told you all this already. But he carried a coffee cup around. It was one of those real nice stainless steel, had a little leather on the bottom, real nice lid. And that's all he did all day long was carry that coffee cup around and point to the children. And so what a waste of his time and energy and expertise, because he was a really smart guy. But he had a really nice coffee cup, and that was a coffee cup drinking strategy. And I tell it all the time because it's the truth. So he would sip, and I might have a new idea, sip and point. He'd take a sip, and then he'd point to the children. And that's all he did all day long, for real. And he was, excellent at mathematics. But that's what he'd do. And so very, very waste of his time and the kids' time and the other teachers' time. So one teach, one assist should only be used rarely. And when we first started co-teaching, that's the one we used a lot, right? And we still use that a lot, but it's one of the least effective. It's about 5% of the time too. So we don't want to use those things. But if we do it, if we do use that strategy, we want to immediately roll into something else. So it's okay if I'm helping with a lesson or I'm helping students for that initial instruction. But then we need to break out into groups, or we don't need to do that every single day. So the one teach, one observe, and one teach, one assist should only be used 5% of the time or less. And again, that's a whole different way we think about it, right? Because I remember I was not a math teacher. And so when I was co-teaching in the math classroom, even at the 8th grade level, there were some concepts that I hadn't revisited in a long time. So it took me a little bit of time to catch up, right? And I had to listen and learn a little bit before I could be the teacher or lead any of those stations. So it took me a little bit of learning, and we allow yourself a little grace on that too. We got to learn. If you're in high school chemistry or if you're in high school physics, you're going to need a little bit of time to learn, because you're not the content expert if you're a special ed teacher, but if you're a regular ed teacher, you're a content expert. You might not be the strategies expert like the special ed. That's why it's so good that we all work together. But, it takes us a little while to figure out things, right, and work together and to figure out how to partner up. So, co-teaching takes a little bit of work, and it takes a little more work on the front end of it, but it's really the best thing for kids.
And it's hard to keep your class up sometimes.
Sure is. It is. Well, because what if somebody doesn't teach and you don't have time to be wasting on not getting good, solid lessons in, right? So it is hard. You have to trust that person is going to do the best job they can and give the instruction correctly. And that's the truth. That's why the lady she kicked me and the kids out, that 3rd grade teacher down the hallway. She didn't know if I could teach to what she wasn't very nice. And she just she didn't want me in her room because she didn't like for the children to talk out loud and they had to work in their workbooks. But she didn't want me in there. So I was not invited. And I was kicked out. And again, that's a long time ago, so we didn't really understand it to the level that we do now. And she was mean. That was just it. She was just mean. Sometimes that just happens. But yeah, you're right. But it is. So you have to trust each other. You have to have somebody. You got to show up every day if you're a special ed teacher, right? You got to show up. You got to do You got to be there. And if you're the regular ed teacher, you got to give a little bit of grace to those people learning, right? So it's a partnership. All right, you ready? You need your thumbs up, thumbs down. We're going to take a little quiz. Or true, false, I mean. Y'all sat long enough. All right, here's the first one. True or false? Co-teaching is whenever two adults are in the classroom. Okay, so that one's a tough one, right? So why do you think? What do you think? Why do you think it's false?
Well, if it's just two adults, what if the curriculum is that there's two adults in the room, but one's not technically co-teaching?
Yeah, one of them.
Be walking around sipping coffee.
That's right.
Yeah.
The sipping point. Right? But so sometimes we get mixed up. But if you, so sometimes that's the way we perceive it. You know, if there's two people in there, we assume that they're working, but they're not, maybe not always working, right? Right. All right, ready for the next one? When you say co-teach, you mean that two teachers are in the room daily.
Well,
Okay.
daily, do you mean like vast majority of days?
Right.
Or every day.
Right.
Daily would be.
I could see a case where people are effective co-teachers, but there may be particular days that for whatever reason.
That's right. It may be 3 days a week you're in that classroom, right? So it could be. Yeah. I mean, you could be in there every day, but there might be days that you don't have. When you say co-teach, can I co-teach with you 3 days a week and still be effective co-teachers? We could. Yeah, we can do that. So that one's kind of tricky too. Here's another one. Co-teaching is a strategy for differentiating instruction. That's a tough one too. These are tricky. All right. If you think it's false, why do you think it's false?
I don't really think it's a strategy.
You think more of like a methodology, like it's just a method. I can see that. Yep. So it could be because what we do in that co-teaching, we could differentiate because of kids, but it could be our methodology. So I would agree with that.
Co-teaching, you can use that phrase as both a noun and a verb too. Because as a model,
Yeah.
co-teaching model a noun, but the actual act of co-teaching would be a verb. So I can see it both being used in methodology or more specifically in strategy.
It could be. Yeah. I mean, I can see that rationale. I think the biggest thing is how we deliver that. It could be the methodology how we deliver that co-teaching. We can do that because we're going to have to figure out when we're working with those kids that have an IEP in that co-teaching setting, how are we getting them specially designed instruction? And that's what the second part of this work is today, is how do we get them that specially designed instruction? All right? Co-teaching cannot be used to support students with disabilities. All right, I think we got 100% on that one. Right, it is, right? That's why we started doing that, is because it's a strategy for differentiation. It can be a way to scaffold instruction, but that's how we help our kids with disabilities when we don't want to pull them out of the classroom. All right, one teach, one observe is the best practice in co-teaching. That's easy that one was pretty easy. We had 100% consensus on that one too. So I like the little true false. Those are kind of fun. I found them on the internet for free, off a place I shall not speak of. I'm just going to tell y'all. No, it's the other one. Yeah. I shall not name where those came from, but it was free. But it's free. But anyway, I like the true false. I think that's fun to kind of have how you get a chance to, yeah. So we used to think about co-teaching as we're thinking, the traditional responsibilities. We're talking about in the general ed setting. A lot of times we used to handle co-teaching or the way we do that with special education a lot different than we do now. And so we, like the teacher that taught down the hallway, the second one, she wanted to teach children who fit into her curriculum, that could read on their own and they could do their work in the workbook. And so my students could not do the work in the workbook because they couldn't read third grade text on their own. So that's why she sent us down the hallway, right? And That's the way we used to think. But it's not that way anymore, really. It's a shared responsibility. We are all responsible for all children. And special ed kids are regular ed kids first, and then they have an additional support. So that's how we have to think about it. So it's like the special ed kids get everything everybody else does plus a little bit more that's special to them. And so really it becomes something that we all do. And that's not a bad thing, right? It's not a bad thing. It's for the children. It's the right thing to do. It really is just the right thing to do. And the other thing is, you got two experts in the room. If you're a general ed teacher, you're a content specialist. If you're a special ed teacher, you're a learning process specialist. That is a great combination. Because have you ever heard somebody come up with an idea and you think, oh, that's a great idea. I wouldn't have thought of that if if you hadn't been having those conversations. Well, that's how that works, when you co-teach. Somebody has a really good idea, or they might solve a math problem differently, or they do a science plan differently. And then so it's kind of shifted. The way we do co-teaching is a little bit different than it used to be. The same thing for special education. Generally, we said we only work in the resource room or in special class or at special schools if you are a teacher of students with disabilities. But now it's our responsibility to collaborate with general ed teachers. It's to work with them in that classroom setting. And then we have to help we incorporate other people to help, tutors and kids, peer tutors or mentors and those kinds of things too. So our shift has changed too. So I can remember at a school that I taught at years ago, I taught regular ed reading, but I taught special education. And when I was teaching special education, there was a building off kind of over the hill just a little bit. That's where the special ed classrooms were. And they spent most of their day down there. And this has been a long time ago. And you all maybe, I don't know if y'all remember, if any of y'all are old enough to remember kind of those settings that we had like that sometimes. But, we completely distinguished between the two. We had different lunch times. There was much of a division between those. We don't do that way anymore, right? Mainly our accountability model says, who do we test? Everybody. Everybody has to be assessed, and they're assessed on grade level standards, right? Even our students with disabilities are assessed on grade level standards. Even if they're reading 3 or 4 grade levels behind, we're still assessing them. So how are we ever going to get them or move them if we don't teach them, we give them access to grade level standards, right? So that's what we start doing with accommodations and modifications is we're getting them access so that they can hear and know what those conversations are at grade level standards. That's right. So we don't have, we're not just keeping them down there. And you maybe don't have that experience, but I can very distinctly recall those classrooms that were they were kind of down below the campus, and they stayed down there all day long. They'd come up for lunch and they'd go back down there. And they were completely removed from, and that was not like the kids with the most severe disabilities. That was the special education resource rooms. And they were, yeah, so they were different. So we're not doing it that way anymore, right? Because we know better, and we learn better, we do better. And that's just the way it is. That's why I always try to tell myself that about when I was that 3rd grade special ed teacher, and she bullied me into taking my kids. I didn't know better. I was just trying to get a job, and I wanted to do the best job I could, and I was trying to serve my kids, and I didn't advocate.
I'll surrender too. If I think it's not worth my effort, I just surrender and I'm not whatever.
Yeah, and it's hard to be an advocate. That's right. So that's something we have to just keep fighting the fight, though, right? We just have to keep fighting the fight because it's the right thing to do for our kids. And we want them. So guess what? Somebody's going to be paying Social Security and retirement and all that stuff when we're old and retired. We want kids to get a job and work. We want them to go to school. We want them to have productive members of society. We want them to work. We want them to take care of us when we're old. So we want to make sure we do a good job with them, right? All right, so we're going to do station teaching. So let's talk a little bit about station teaching, and then we're going to do it. All right, so right here, we're going to do, so for today's purposes, for station teaching, I didn't divide the particular content. So we're going to have a station for reading, a station for math, a station for science, and a station for social studies. And I did that because everybody teaches something different, and I just wanted us to kind of have an experience of what that feels like. All right? So you're going to rotate. So you're going to move around the room, and so there'll be somebody there to facilitate that station for you, and then we're going to talk about how that looks like in a differentiation practice. And so we're going to practice it here in just a second, but I'm going to tell you a couple things about it. We have to think about the different approaches. So we're going to pick station first. We're going to talk about, I want you to look for cooperative group learning when you go to those stations. I want for you to look at the instructional strategies that are used in the stations. I want you to think about opportunities for collaboration. I want you to think about how you can use what you learn in that station to meet the needs of different disability areas, students that you have. So I want you to be thinking as you go through. I don't want you to just move through, but I want you to be thinking about what does that look like? What do I see that's in that instruction? How can I improve that? How can this be a better lesson? How can I transfer that to what I teach? So we're going to go in there and we're going to have some different stations and we're going to practice. But I'm going to tell you what the stations are first. But let me tell you what happened to me one time. So I had this brilliant idea when I was teaching fourth grade reading. I was teaching regular ed, fourth grade reading. And I had this brilliant idea I was going to do stations in my class. That was the way to touch all the children, and I was going to do it. So I had about 20, I can't remember, 28 maybe kids in there. And I set up 5 stations. And in my 5 stations, I had activities for every one of them. And I told the children at the beginning of the lesson, I said, this is this station, and this is what you're going to do. And this is this station, this is what you're going to do. And this station, and I went through all 5 of them and told all of them, all 5, what we're going to do at the beginning of the lesson. 10-year-olds. Some of them might have been 11. And I expected them to listen and to do what I asked them to do without any more instruction. So I started out, and we all got to our first station, and things went a little bit okay, but not really okay, but just we made it. So the timer goes off, and they forgot which way was clockwise, and I forgot to tell them which way was clockwise. And about that time, my principal comes to the room to watch. The first day I ever done it, I just said, well, you may want to come back. This is bad. Anyway, so we had chaos. It looked like a Barnum and Bailey 3-ring circus in my classroom. I had a big classroom. Kids didn't know where they were going. Miss Dion, what was I supposed to be doing? What are we doing at this station? Miss Dion, can you come and help me? Right, so it is like a circus in there. And I thought, I'm never doing this again, ever. I'll never do this again. And so I talked myself out of it and finally got over it. But it was the worst experience I ever had. My principal come to see me that day.
They always do that.
Yes, it never fails. And it was crazy. And it was messy. And kids didn't know where they were going. So when I went back and started learning a little bit more about co-teaching and trying to study about it, what I learned was, probably you need 3 stations. That's what this research says. You need 3. So you need 1 station led by the regular ed teacher. You need another station led by the special ed teacher. And then you need 1 independent station. Right? You can use a technology station, you can make it a writing station, you can have it a fun station, you can have a library station, whatever it is that you want to use. But I started out with 5, and I expected 10-year-olds to remember everything they were supposed to do in all 5 stations. And so I'm telling you that because sometimes it gets messy, sometimes you make a mistake, but you just got to keep trying. Sometimes your principal comes and sees it, and you can't live over it, and you want to crawl under the table, but you can just make it. You can just make it through it. But I am going to give you a little bit of directions before we start so you can kind of see how this is going to happen. So you have a card, and on the back of your card it has a 1, 2, 3, or 4. All right, so on the back. So if you're 1, you're going to go over here with Dr. Will Cayeton, and you're going to start at the social studies. And over here, you're going to watch a little video, and our theme, so we're going to kind of do it thematically, is about pollution, ocean pollution. So we're going to read some stuff, we're going to do some science experiments, we're going to do some social studies, we're going to do some math. So if you're a 1, you're going to come see Dr. Will Cayeton with social studies. If you're a 2, you're going to start over there with Miss Brenda Combs. And Brenda is doing a science experiment. We're going to talk about pollution. So you guys are going to be doing a lab experiment. So you've got a lab sheet. You're going to be talking about the pollution in the ocean, and you're going to be recording data on your experiment. All right? And if you're a 3, you're going to come and see Miss Chastity, and she's literacy. And we're going to read a reading passage and do a strategy. And if you're a 4, you're going to start back in the corner with me, and we're going to do math.
Yes.
And I hope, is there anybody math teachers in here? Please raise your hand. I will be calling on y'all today because Stephanie Kidd is our math consultant and she's not here. And so she's left me, abandoned me today. So what we're going to do is if you're a 4, you move to 1, right? And we're just going to, if you're going to move all the way around, just go to the next station. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. So everybody got that one? Are we good on that one? Anybody need any directions else on that one? Okay, so we're going to spend about 10 minutes on those, so I'm going to go ahead and let you get to your first station, and we'll get started.
So we're going to do it 4 times?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I didn't know
Yep.
that. Okay.
Let me write it down for you. I meant to do that this morning.
Who's timing out?
I don't know.
Gracias. So you shouldn't time me out.
Once
Once I get going.
All right, so about 10 minutes. So is anybody back here teach math already?
No.
Oh, boy. Then it's going to be fun.
No, it's all right.
No, you're fine. You're fine. We got this.
Okay. I'm going to ask you all to do something real quick as you move back to your individual station. I want you to come back to your table, and I'm going to ask you to do one thing, and we're going to take a break. But I want you to do one thing before we take the break. I want you to find a Post-it note, use your index card, whatever you want to do to write on, but I want you to take 1 minute. And remember what we talked about back here? We talked about the differentiation, the uses of co-teaching, some of the instructional strategies you think, the cooperative group learning. I just want you to take 1 minute and write down everything that you found interesting or important or that you want to remember. So take 1 minute and write that on your Post-it note. You write it on whatever you got. Just kind of a brain dump. What are those things that you want to be able to remember about that experience?
You know, can I share my experience too as someone who was...
Yeah, let them do this 1 minute, and then I'll let me give them a minute here.
Work, but unfortunately I teach one class and it's English, and I very seldom branch out into this stuff. More social studies probably than
That's what I was gonna
science
say.
or math. Yeah.
And it could lend itself to social studies, but writing, because you're
Well,
building
that's-
that,
yeah, writing,
in the writing, and you're building the social studies stamina too, right? You're building that content knowledge of social studies, but you're building that writing ability to be able to transfer that. Did you have something else?
To build on what he was talking about, I think this shows the importance of collaboration between the general ed and the regular ed, because when you've got two specialists like that, you come up with some really good ideas. What one doesn't have, the other one does.
That's right. That's right.
I think
Because both of them are experts, right? We're all experts in our way. Whatever our certification is, we become that. We are the experts.
I discussed
Can y'all hear okay without this thing, or do y'all want me to?
I discussed too in our last group that kids learn differently, so being able to differentiate instruction, so each child has an opportunity to learn the content in their own way.
That's right. They can engage a different way
In a
with the
different
content.
way.
Yeah.
Because I told them, I was like, in the reading is definitely not my thing, so I was like, I tried to be as productive as possible, but I really checked out. And and then by the time I got to the science, which is my area, I was really intrigued into it, so I was able to still learn what you all was learning,
Yeah. I'll just let you have it.
Kind of on the same thing that you
You
were
wanna
saying.
hold it?
I really struggle in my classroom to let kids like work together in groups and to not be right over their shoulders the whole time they're talking to each other. So I wrote down to remind myself that, kids collaborating with each other, it unlocks new levels of knowledge for them. Like in the math one, I really struggle with math, so I was waiting for them and working with them and, to work out the problems.
And that's okay, right? That's part of that when we do station teaching, and we have those groups that are not, we don't group them by ability, but we group them randomly, right? You guys were randomly grouped together because you want to hear those good exemplar models, right? You want to hear that thinking and that conversation. And if you're with an IEP group and you're with the same kids all the time, you don't hear that, right? So that's why it's so important to have those conversations. Good, that was a good observation. Did you?
But I was just going to, that's all right, I don't think that. The random groupings first is, what I noticed you all started with, and also you're using the same topic, for the different content areas. And we talked about the chat GBT. I know it's, it's got a negative name, but, how you're able to lower the lexile, keep the vocabulary, and keep that rigor, because most students are below grade level. But it also, it helps close that achievement gap.
Yeah. And if you look at the standard, so the standard that I pulled for the social studies, or for even for this one. This was a 7th grade. So you're thinking about the complexity and the cognitive demand of the standard. You're still asking them to do that thinking about identifying those main ideas and supporting details, and then how do you find that in the text. So you can differentiate by using that. But that was as easy. I wanted to share that with you all. So I just took that more complex text, that grade level text, copied it and put it in AI and asked it. But you have to tell it to keep the vocabulary. Otherwise, it'll lower the vocabulary, and you don't want that to happen, right?
The more they talk about it, obviously, the more they're gonna have that, that long-term.
Yeah. And it's okay to use those teaching tools, right? We're still in control of the teaching and the learning. And we know to the cognitive demand that we're expecting kids to be able to do. But we have some control over the resources that we use, and it allows us. It took me about 2 minutes. I don't know if it took me 2 minutes. How long did it take? It just took a minute.
It was
Probably not.
instant. I mean, I was standing behind her and she copied and pasted and it started going.
Just run it, right? But those are things that you can do because we don't have time. Time is our most valuable commodity. And those are things that we can do real quickly that we can adjust. So I could actually have 3 stations of write. I could have 2 teacher stations. We could be doing main idea and supporting details. And then I might be teaching them a comprehension strategy, right? Just like you guys, the sketching chunk, right? So there's all kinds of things I could be teaching in those 2 different stations, and then the kids independently are reading or doing something else. So I can do that in the context of my classroom, but I can also think about how I can bring in that nonfiction text, how I can integrate, in mathematics, how I can have kids read word problems. Because I look at a word problem sometimes and it's a little intimidating. But if I built the context of it, right, then I knew, okay, how much garbage was in the bottom of the ocean, and that helped me to understand the volume and the mass of that. Okay, anybody have anything else before we take a break? Okay, let's take about a 10-minute break. Go get y'all a snack and have a restroom break. And it is 10:41. Let's come back at 10:51. So we'll come back. We'll take a 10-minute break. There's restrooms, and then they'll grab you a cup of coffee, and there's some bananas and fruit out there. So 10 minutes. It's 10:51, so we'll go ahead and kind of get started back. I'll give everybody just a second to get settled in. If 10 minutes was enough break. Oh, yeah. Yep. Anybody else finish their word search or crossword they want to add? Chastity's going to draw right now for the winner of the cup.
It's cold in here.
I don't know. It wasn't. I'm sure. Thank you.
It can't be no worse than me hollering and talking to them. I don't know what holler boy is talking to. Alex, I think. And it's like, I'm not exaggerating. The sweat was dripping off my face. I never sweat.
Yeah, no.
And I was just like, oh God. So I went out there and he looked at me and I said, I'm burning up. And he looked at me real funny. I said, you don't want to have mine. And I had that mic on. So them 4 in here was giggling.
Cracking up.
And then Danny Paul comes out there. So they send me the blooper. So they took it out.
That's funny. That is funny. That's funny. All right. You got one more? Oh, okay. I thought she was raising her hand.
No whammies, no whammies, no whammies.
Come on. Chastity's going to draw the name. Okay.
Robin Rose.
Robin Rose. All right, Robin, you won a mug. We can if you want to. We can, Chastity. We can do one more if you want. If you want to.
Okay, we got one more.
All right, so Chastity brought another one over, so we're going to do one more.
Daniel McKinney.
All right. All right. Winner, winner. All right. Good. I'm going to get out of the picture. All right.
You'll know snow already. You'll need straw.
Okay. Well,
Thank you all.
I thought y'all was taking one up here. Okay. All right. So we'll get ready to get started back. Hope you enjoyed your break. Before we get back into the next section, and like I said, we're going to move around today. You got your index card? I want you to get up, and we're going to do this thing called Soulmate. And I want you to find a partner that has similar shoes as you. And I want you to share one piece of your name and one piece of information from your card before we get started back. So find somebody that has a pair of shoes that look similar to yours. And if you have a group of 3, it'll be okay. Just read something from your card about yourself. Tell them your name and read something from your card. You can join black shoes. Tennis shoes, okay. Yeah, if you make a group of 3, that's okay. Something from your card. Tell me your name.
I was going to sign in, but I don't see a QR code anywhere.
I hope that you all were able to share a little something about yourself and meet someone else. Yeah, you can't go wrong at the beach. You cannot, except I don't like sand on me, like stuck. That's the only thing, but I like the beach.
Baby powder.
I know, they make these little things now that you can put baby powder in and get the sand off. Somebody invented that because they didn't like the sand touching their, it must be a sensory issue, I guess. All right, so I hope you had just a minute to take a break, meet somebody else. Now let's talk about another practice around co-teaching. So we're going to try to do one more, and then around 11:30 they'll bring our lunch and we'll break for lunch, and we'll let everybody have lunch and kind of enjoy getting to visit. So let's talk a little bit about parallel teaching. And so I think parallel teaching, let's talk about what that looks like. So that is when the students are divided into 2 groups. So you have 2 groups of two groups of students, you have both teachers. Now remember, when we're talking about co-teaching, we've got the regular ed teacher and the special ed teacher, and sometimes the content lends itself to doing that, right? Sometimes that you just need to divide it. That's a particularly good instance when you wanted to have a small teacher-student ratio, right? Or if you wanted to give them more practice. So you've taught the lesson, you divide into 2 groups, they could work on their assignments. So we're going to have that same experience. But this time, we're going to use, let me go back up here. Yeah, let me find 2. Okay, I'm having a little trouble. Okay, so I'm going to let you all practice this again this time, but the KVEC folks are not going to lead it. We're going to take 2 volunteers from the audience here. I know a special ed teacher, a regular ed teacher. We want to take a couple of you all that will be willing to be the teachers.
Well, we are together in class, actually.
So you guys are regular ed and special ed?
Yeah.
You guys want to volunteer?
Not overly, but we can. They did, that's why she said it.
Okay, let's go. We'll take you guys. Okay, so you guys stand up. So I'm going to tell you something. So which one is which? It doesn't matter to me which one's which. You're special ed and you're the regular ed teacher. So there is an article, and I'm going to give each one of you this article.
Okay.
All right, and we're going to read this passage. Now, this passage I got from AI. I generated this from AI in about 1 minute because I wanted an excerpt, because I didn't want the whole book. I'm not going to use the whole novel today, right? We're just going to do this as a practice activity. So I pull an excerpt that gets to the exact thing I want to measure today when we're doing this co-teaching lesson. So I'm going to ask that you do, I'm going to say, it doesn't matter which group is which. So I'm going to ask you, you're going to take the red group and you're going to take the blue group. So you can take the blue group on this side. So you're going to flip your index card over. If you're a blue dot, you're going to come somewhere over here where you can hear, what's your name?
Faith.
Faith. Okay, we're going to hear Faith and
Sam.
Sam. Okay, so if you're a red group, you're going to go over here with Sam, and Sam's going to do this lesson with you. So they've never seen this lesson before, right? They've never seen this lesson before, but we're talking about character development. Right? So that's a standard. We're talking about a reading standard. We're talking about character development. So these teachers have not seen this lesson, but they have on their clipboard a paper for each of you and 3 Post-it notes. And I've already got the questions ready. So you can kind of take your liberty of how you want to lead and facilitate that as a teacher if you were working through this reading passage. Right? Because we're really thinking about character development. And we're talking about these 2 characters over the course of this text and how they become friends. right? So that's part of the standard. We're thinking about how the Kentucky Academic Standard talks about the development of character and how they change and evolve through the course of a story. So they're taking that standard and they're going to take this piece of text and they're going to teach that target, or that's our learning intention is today, for you all to be able to work through that. So if you are a red group, you can kind of just move over to this side. If you are a blue group, you can just kind of scoot over to here. You can turn your seat around. And then here's the questions for the blue group. Right, here's your questions. So you have your passage, and so they have a Post-it note for each question that they can answer that and let them work on that. If you're a red, what did I say? What group are you? I forgot the color. Blue? If you're blue, so you guys can teach your lesson. Where would you like for me to put here? I'll put yours, here's the questions for your lesson right here. Is that okay right there? All right, so I'm going to let you all, so there's 3 Post-it notes on there for you to use to answer your questions, but these guys have the autonomy to do it however they want to. So I'm going to give y'all about 10 minutes.
So what we're going to do is, I'm going to pause and
Stay just a second where you're at, just 1 second. All right, and let's talk about, first of all, Sam and Faith. Let's give a little round of applause for Sam volunteering. Thank you guys for doing that. Now, let's talk about this. They had never seen this text before, right? This brand new text. They had no idea. They just introduced themselves and volunteered themselves. But what I want to talk to them about is first, Sam, will you tell us about how did you teach this content? What strategies did you use? And that's a good point. So those are things that we know about our students, right? So we can use proximity. There are some strategies that we know in relation to that. We put Kyle beside of us, or where he can hear or he can see and get those supports. So we can structure our classrooms around that way. And those are very intentional. I think the conversation that we're having right here is very candid about how hard it is, but how hard it is to try to figure out. Those 2 ladies that did our lessons really adjusted, right? They did a good job of adjusting their volume. I noticed that Miss Sam moved closer to her group. I noticed that Miss Faith stood over here and everybody was turned that way. So they adjusted. I was noticing that they adjusted as we moved through the lesson. I noticed that when this group got up to put their Post-it notes, because she chose a different strategy, right? You answered the same questions, read the same material, but you did that very differently. Both of you all did it very differently. Did we get to what we needed to? Yeah, you got the questions answered, right? We talked about the task and the assessment at the end. We could talk about, maybe it's just a little bit of variability, but we're teaching the same standards, but you adjust it accordingly. And so I could see that. So when this group goes up to put their Post-it notes up, I noticed for a second this group glanced, but they went right back to work. But that's when you stepped in a little closer here, and so everybody was continuing to be focused. So if you anticipate that and you know kind of the activities that you're going to do, you can plan for those as well, and that's helpful. And then I saw it work, beautifully, parallel teaching in a 3rd grade classroom, just a regular size classroom. And so the teacher in the front had they just had their seats turned around, looking at the teacher, and she was using the whiteboard. And then in the back of the room, the teacher had the Mondo board. And so they had different approaches. They were teaching the exact same thing, but no 2 of us in this room is going to approach it exactly the same. and the kids had learned, so they had learned. It did take practice. It might not work the first time, just like my stations didn't work the first time. They were terrible. It was the worst embarrassment I ever had in my life in my classroom. But I didn't stop doing those things because of that. And the same thing with parallel teaching. Sometimes you just need a smaller group. Right? Sometimes when you have 20 or 30 kids, you got to have a smaller group because you want to be able to see what they're doing in practice. So she could take this content, for example here, real quickly, she could read through 10 or 12 Post-it notes versus 25 Post-it notes, right? And organizing and thinking and giving kids feedback and checking for understanding. And could they support, because we were looking for textual evidence too, right? So you can real quickly assess quickly to do that. But sometimes you need to just divide that content into 2 different. So you can do that if you use visuals, right? Some kids, and all kids in the classroom might have a good way of, a preference for learning with visual models. This group over here may have a preference with something else. You can mix up those groups. It doesn't have to just be split down the middle. I mean, I just split you all up randomly. But you can intentionally divide kids up too by the supports or the scaffolds or the instructional strategy that you're going to use. I noticed Miss Sam used highlighting. You had them highlight, right? So you had the highlighting, and Miss Faith you did the Post-it notes, and what else did you all use over here?
We focus a lot on making sure.
Okay. Okay, so you used some context clues.
What do you see?
What do you see? What do you know? Okay, so you had some guiding questions. You used context clues. You might have had a who, what, when, where, why organizer, right, that they could talk about what that happened. You might have a timeline to think about how their friendship changed over the course of that text. There's all kinds of things that you could do to visually represent that. And so sometimes we need that in our classrooms because we have different learners at different times with different content that we're teaching. And sometimes we just need to check to see where kids are at. And so it doesn't matter which teacher does which part, right? But both of you were able to teach that lesson and with no preparation, right? Because you already are teachers. You are teachers. You are professionals. You can teach those lessons, and they walked right in there, and you guys, you could see that they quickly went right into their practice and their craft, and they knew exactly what to do. So as learners, what about you guys? How did that feel as learners? It went pretty okay for you?
I felt more comfortable.
You did?
Smaller.
Okay. See, that's a good point. Yeah.
I like the open discussion.
Okay. So you had a smaller group but open discussion. Okay.
I am the method of random selection. You know, she was like, if you have a plain t-shirt on, you know, and then like if you have or brown eyes, and like I immediately started looking at people around me. You know, so it's kind of just instead of pulling a stick out of the cup and it just being a name, it kind of you also get to know your classmates.
So some team building or some collaboration. Yep. Right. So you can see she's again very, very differently they handled that, but they still got to the end of the content, right? They got the questions, they got to the end, and they were able to answer those questions. So that's what we're talking about with parallel teaching. That's what it looks like and feels like. And it could be, you know, the way, like I said, that third grade classroom, they just had the kids turn around, and so they were facing. Because what you're talking about, the disruption, it's hard. And then the other teacher was sitting in the back of the room, so the kids, so it was divided down the middle, and the kids were backs. Their backs were there, and so the other teacher's on the other end, so they're on the polar end.
Their backs weren't turned.
Yeah.
We did it 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
And we were like, this isn't working.
Yeah.
But I never thought, like, because her classroom isn't set up to where we could do that easily.
Yeah.
That might have been a lot better having them face the teacher back of the room.
Yeah. I mean, there's little adjustments that we can make.
Yeah.
So we don't want to give up. Because if I'd have given up on station teaching, I would have never used that again. And I learned as a special ed teacher, that's the only way I could teach when I had 3 grade levels in my classroom at the same time. And I had some kids reading on 3rd grade level and some kids reading on kindergarten level, and I had some kids reading on 5th grade level. I had to be able to adjust, and I had to be able to move those kids fluidly through those groups. And so if I given up, and I said I was quitting, I was never doing it again. But I kept on, and I got better at it, right? And I keep getting better at it because I keep trying and practicing. And that's what we know about co-teaching, is it's not going to be beautiful the first time. And sometimes those teachers might make you mad. But we got to work through those things. We got to keep working, because really what we're trying to do is improve our student outcomes for kids. That's why we make all this money and we're famous. Right? That's why we do all this work all the time. And we're off in the summer, and we never go to PD in July. And we're laying at the beach, right? But anyway, that's why we're here. And so those are ways that we can work together, and we respect each other and mutually, and that makes it good. And don't give up, right? We just keep trying, because there's going to be tweaks that you might need to do. You might have them set in circles in one group. There's all kinds of ways to adjust that. But sometimes the content lends to where if you have 2 teachers that can break those kids into a smaller group, look at the value of that. You can give feedback, right? You can you could let the kids work together. There's all kinds of more practice turns. Okay, good news, lunch is ready. And are we ready to let them go ahead? So we'll take a lunch break. We'll go. I'll let y'all go. We'll go to about 12:30. I'll give you right close to an hour. By the time you go through and eat and get your snack and go to the restroom and do all that, so we'll come back together about 12:30. If everybody's done a little bit earlier, we'll come back together just a little bit earlier so we can finish up today. All right, go help yourself to lunch. Is there, you guys want to get started back in a second, or you want a couple more minutes? I'd said till 12:30, but we might finish up a little early if we get back started. That good? If we'll go ahead and get started then. Looks like everybody's finished. Sometimes it takes 45 minutes, but we have small groups, so we didn't hardly take an hour. So sometimes it takes an hour. Just depends. It is good. That one is a good lunch. I have it on my sleeve, down my shirt, no tied pin. I have it all down my shirt, not just in one spot, all down my shirt. I tried the new strawberry dessert. Did y'all try the strawberry dessert? I have it all on my shirt. Yeah, strawberry chiffon all down my left arm. That's right. Not on my arm. Okay, so I think, do we have everybody? We'll go ahead and start talking about it. So we have one more co-teaching model that we're going to spend a little bit of time on. And we'll talk a little bit about it, and then we'll practice one more time. So if you're a math teacher, be thinking about volunteering, because I'm going to ask two teachers to volunteer. If you're a math teacher and you would like to volunteer, that'd be fantastic, because I'm not a math teacher, and I would like to have a math teacher to do this lesson. So when we do alternative teaching. So be thinking about if you're going to volunteer when we get to that section. Okay, so the alternative teaching is when you, and I'll give you this model. So an alternative teaching model is when one teacher leads a large group and one teacher leads a small group. Now remember this morning I told you all about this lady that taught social studies down the hall from me. That was so in her classroom, all the other students were in the front of the room, and her special ed kids sat in the back of the room. That was her alternative. That was her teaching strategy. But that was every day, every class, Monday through Friday. And so when we talk about alternative teaching, there are 3 times instances when it's really, really effective. And one is if you need to reteach. So if you need to reteach a strategy, you can pull those kids back. So let's say you had your lesson. You did your exit slip or your formative assessment, and you look to see that only 60% of the class got it that day. And so the next morning you come in and you're going to start, ready to start a new lesson, but maybe you give the whole group some additional practice, but one of the teachers pulls the other students back and does another reteaching lesson. So that's what our example is going to be this next time. So you're going to have one teacher that teaches the whole group, and then I'm going to have another teacher that pulls the students back for an alternative strategy. And so this one is also good if you have children that have trouble with vocabulary. And let's say you're getting ready to start a vocabulary unit, or you're just starting a new unit of study, either whatever area. It could be science, social studies, math, but you want to give them some models or to pre-teach that vocabulary. That is a great time to pull them back and do that vocabulary lesson with them, and then they can rejoin the group because you've built that context. And you probably, the story I'll tell, I always tell the story. People are probably tired of it, but so we had a student, and I was collaborating, I was teaching special ed, and we had the student. He had an intellectual disability, so he had a mild MMD. And so being able to remember things was tough for him. And so we had worked 2 weeks on a unit of study around bodies of water. We had lakes, rivers, oceans, streams. And I'd worked really hard. You ever felt like when you've just worked so hard and you thought, we've really done a good job with this unit? And so the social studies teacher decided that he's going to have them build a diorama. So that was our end project. And they were going to build a model of different bodies of water. And so I thought, wow, we've really nailed this. It's a great lesson. We've done a good job. And so he comes into school carrying his diorama. And it was a very pivotal time in my career professionally. He comes in bringing his diorama, and he's got a shark in the creek. Right? And so we had spent 2 weeks teaching that lesson. And when I saw the shark in the creek, I said, you have missed it. And so I tell that story all the time because we spent 2 weeks teaching him.
And you just knew he had it.
I knew he had it. He could do it. We practiced and we practiced and we practiced and we practiced. But what I didn't think about was that I've come from Letcher County. I was teaching in Letcher County. We don't have a lake in Letcher County. The closest lake is Knott County, Carr Creek Lake. He'd never traveled outside of Kentucky. He'd never seen the ocean. He'd never seen a Great Lake. So he had no point of reference. So we spent 2 weeks teaching that context of that. We was teaching him all about those bodies of water, and they didn't look any different than that creek that ran behind his house, right? Because that's what he knew about. He probably saw the Kentucky River. Yeah, maybe. And so he just knew fish, or he knew sharks were in water, but he didn't know what water, right? So we taught those lessons, and we'd worked so hard about geography and teaching about those bodies of water. And so, I tell that story all the time, but it was pivotal in my career because I finally realized the hard way that we missed the boat and building the context of it. So, and the reason I'm telling you that is we got a lot of kids that don't have that context. They don't have that background knowledge. They don't have those opportunities. And if we don't build that, we miss them, right? And we can do that through visuals. We can do that through videos. Some of the things that we did in our stations this morning. Simulations. We have such technology. Like you can feel a simulation of riding a roller coaster, right? If you you can watch a video and see the simulation. At least you have an idea of what that feels like. Or we have VR, right? We have all these virtual reality experiences, all those things. So we have opportunities that kids that don't leave our area, but they can still have those experiences. But we have to build that context. And so when we know our students struggle with vocabulary, that is a perfect time to use a vocabulary to pre-teach that vocabulary. And some of our kids, not just our students with disabilities, but all of our kids struggle with vocabulary, right? Because you think about that. So, maybe a vocabulary needs to be a station, right? Maybe when you're co-teaching, our kids have such a trouble with vocabulary that's a station. But sometimes you just have a small group that you need to teach that to. And so had we taught that, give them the context of what the ocean was versus a lake versus a river, we could have built that many different ways. But anyway, we could do that in that small group. And it doesn't have to be the whole lesson. So that could be, a 15-minute mini lesson, right? Something really simple, real easy to figure out, and teach and to have practice. It doesn't matter if it's the regular ed teacher or the special ed teacher that teaches whoever you decide. If the special ed teacher, if you're really good and you're the regular ed teacher and you feel like you got a good strategy that you can use with the kids, you can pull them back while the special ed teacher leads that lesson. Or vice versa. If the special ed has a really good strategy for teaching that vocabulary, then the regular ed teacher leads the big group. The idea is that we don't keep the same kids in that group all the time, right? Like my neighbor down the hallway, the social studies teacher. We don't ever want it to be like that. But so that kind of gives us an idea about alternative teaching. So that's what it looks like. It can be, but then remember those kids that would hardly ever get the extra that are the gifted kids, right? Our gifted kids, how often do we give them that enrichment? My kid was in school and she was, she was pretty gifted, and you know what she would get sometimes? Extra work.
And
So,
they don't want to show you that
yeah.
you do that.
That's right. So sometimes extra work is not always, right? So that happens sometimes. We don't really know what to do with them. Well, you can use alternative teaching for those kids. So one of you could pull those kids back to the teacher table and you could do an enrichment activity, right? You could give them something that extended beyond just more math problems or more science problems. But how do we enrich or make that deeper thinking about a topic, right? You could do some experimentation. You could embed lots of different things with them to get to more higher cognitive demand for that, for something, a concept. Anyway, so there are 3 ways that you can use it. So you can reteach, pre-teach, or use it for enrichment. So it's a good strategy, and you may not want to use it all the time. And you may go in and want to teach a lesson and then move to stations. You may want to go in and teach a lesson and then go into parallel. So you wouldn't want to use alternative teaching all the time, but it's highly recommended. So it's one of the top 3. So if you're thinking about, we're choosing those 6, that's the 3rd one of the top 3. And that's a good one to choose. Now, we're going to the alternative teaching and we're going to do a model of that. Now, I need a good math teacher. That's going to be 2 math teachers to volunteer. And I'm waiting to see if we have a volunteer. Do we have any volunteers? Well, let me tell you what we're going to do. Maybe then you'll decide if you'll volunteer or not. So, can everybody kind of see this? Y'all can see this? Okay. So we're going to do area model. So we're going to we're going to have a lesson on area model. Now, I'm going to give you some fractions. And we're going to multiply fractions. Okay? So I'm going to give everybody one of these handouts. So we're going to multiply fractions. Do we have any volunteers? There's y'all one. So go ahead and grab one of those. Just everybody get one of those handouts. It's math, multiplying fractions. Do we have any volunteers? Going once, going twice. Who's got the next birthday?
So you scared everybody with fractions.
I know. I'm scared about them too, so I'm going to do it. So I could mess up, so I'm just going to tell y'all ahead of time. That's right. So I'm going to be real vulnerable here because I could very well mess up. Our math consultant left me today, and I'm going to remind her of that she left me today. Just for the record. Okay, so we're talking about area model, and we're teaching kids how to do. So we're going to teach area model. So I'm going to show you kind of a model of how we would teach this. All right, so if we're going to multiply 1/2 by 1/2, I'm going to build that model. So for example, if you're going to look and you'll notice that I have a quadrant. So I'm going to have 1/2 and 1/2. So the first thing I'm going to do is come up here and I'm going to draw my quadrant, right? And then I'm going to draw a line here and I'm going to say that's half. So let me go over that with my black marker. There it is. So the first thing I'm going to do is build a model. Okay, so I'm going to multiply these, but the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have to say that's half. So in my model, I'm going to divide this in half. Okay, so there's my half. So I have a top half and a bottom half, right? Well, I also then am going to multiply by 1/2 again. So then I'm going to make another model. So then I'm going to take my top two quadrants and I'm going to divide those, right? Because I'm going to cut it in half. So that's going to be my half. Okay, now I'm going to think about what is 1/2. So I'm going to color that in with this orange color, right? Because 1/2. So this whole thing is 1/2 right here, right? You can see my 1/2. Now, I'm going to have to multiply that by another half, right? So that's what all this purple, that's why I have a different color. So this purple. So this is actually another half, right? This is half and this is half. So I come here and I'll do this. All right. Now, what do I have now that's both parts are colored?
1/4.
I have 1/4. All right. So I have one part that's 1/4 and the rest of the parts are colored in, right? So I'm building a visual model for kids and they can build this model in order to multiply fractions. So 1/4 of that. So how do we do that? It's a tough one, isn't it?
Or you look at what is shaded in by both fractions.
Yep, you look at what's shaded in by both fractions. So most of us didn't learn that way, right? We didn't learn to think about solving fraction problems like that. But kids who need that visual support, so I can build those models, right? So we probably learned by finding the common denominator, right? That's how most of us learn to solve math problems. But kids who need to build visuals, we may use and build visuals with this model. Well, we also have that same model if we have it through cards, right? So we have these resources. So I might teach it this way. So we're thinking about a whole group instruction, and I might look for different models like 1/2 of, so there's 1/2, right, of 2. But, so I can build. These are considered semi-concrete models in mathematics, right, because the kids are not touching or using those as manipulatives. So we solve this problem with area model. So I'd teach that lesson. And then I'll give you another example. Same thing. So I use this same strategy. So I went ahead and built these before for our training for this example. So now I have 2 6 times 1/3. So I go back and I build my model again, right? I build my model again, and then I divide it by 6. I divide it into 6 sections, right? Because I'm looking at 6 parts. So I build my model here. Okay, so there's my model, and then I'm going to divide it by 6 parts. Okay, so I divided that by 6 parts, and I have 2 6. So I'm going to mark out 2 parts of that, right? Okay, now I'm going to build 1/3. So I'm going to divide this top part into how many? 3. So I've got 1, So this is one section, two sections, three sections, right? So I have 2/3. Now I'm looking over here, so I have this area right here that has both of them, right? That has both. And then I have the rest of this. So how many of these altogether do I have? How many squares do I have? So I have 18 altogether, and how many are shaded? 2. So what does that give me? 2/18, or then I could reduce that fraction down to 1/9, right? So that's a way I could build that semi-concrete or that visual model for students. So I can continue to practice that, right, with my whole group. So let's say that was a very complex lesson, because we don't normally think that way, right? When I tried to think through that lesson, I was thinking, I don't solve math problems that way. I don't do multiplying fractions that way, because I was taught to find that common denominator and to do those things. So let's say I built this model, and then as a teacher, I'm going to have one of you all volunteer. And so there is, you got those worksheets on your page. And I'm going to let you all practice a couple of those. And you can do it at your table with a partner. You don't have to do it on your own. But you will look at your sheet, and you should have, on the back of your card, you have either a star or a cloud. And it's a funny looking cloud because I drew them myself. So it's a real funny. How many clouds do I have? All right, so if you're a cloud, you're going to come over here to this table over here, and we're going to do some math, and you're going to take these with you. All right, so if you're a cloud, you come and pick up some fraction bars and move over here. Just get them over there. So, how many people are clouds? You all are good? I'll be over with you guys in just a second. I put your fraction bars over there. So if you're a star, you're going to do the left side of the paper. Or if you're a cloud, you're going to do the problems on the right side of the paper. Right? So if you're a cloud, you're going to move over here. If you're a star, you stay. Now, who's going to be the teacher who's going to do that? Can somebody else do a model for me up here of that same fraction? Somebody want to try it? You could choose one of those problems and build a model. Somebody want to volunteer to do that? No volunteers? You want to do it? It's okay if you don't. It's not perfect. All right. So it's Casey is going to lead this one. So you guys are doing those. Do y'all see my chart paper? Lost? Yeah, here it is. So Casey's going to lead the whole group, and you guys are going to build a model with her. So choose the first one on that list, on the stars side of your paper. And Casey's going to build that model for us. So Casey's going to write her problems. You can go back and look at the examples before, and you need 2 colors.
She's got aha moment.
I love that.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
You had like put that the stars.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody on track.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I folded it. That way you'd have different examples. Yeah.
That's genius.
And you can do it. That's a differentiation.
Never would have.
But you can differentiate that real quick that way.
I did know that.
And there's your
What do we do with everybody?
Yeah. So, all right, guys. So the whole group, if you're a star, you want to pay attention to Casey, and Casey's going to do the first problem with you. Right? So I've already seen, so let's assume, are all you all stars? If you need to move around, you can. So these are all, you got the whole group, Casey. So I'm going to pull the clouds. And that wasn't very nice. I didn't really intend, like, clouds mean like rainy, not sunshiny. So I should have done stars and sunshine.
Oh, listen. Clouds mean cooler weather. Clouds are
Okay, all right. So I'm going to let Casey lead this one.
Okay.
And then I'm going to come over here and talk to you guys about what that's going to look like. And then you guys are going to share about what that looks like.
Okay.
So you guys are clouds.
Yeah, we're done.
All right. Okay. So let's talk about it a little bit. So let's talk about the structure. We're over here in the alternative group still trying to figure this out, right? We're working through these models. So let's talk a little bit about the whole group instruction. And Casey, just tell us a little bit about what you did so all of us can hear and we talk about a little bit about it.
So we started, I used a lot of vocabulary to make sure they knew what a numerator and denominator was, and the purpose of that was your part to whole. So we started with 6/8. I told everybody to draw a square. Ellie was mischievous and was like, "Where do I draw this at?"
Okay.
So I told her, "Shut up." PBISU later girl. So I started with a square, and then we divided into 8 because that
Okay.
was our whole number, and then we colored in, make that 6 eighths. And then I had, everybody was trying to draw the 12 parts, and they were getting kind of confused, so I tried to tell them to look at it as columns and just look at the columns.
Mm-hmm.
So then we shaded in, when I'm doing this on my paper, I simplified before I ever multiplied.
Yeah. Right.
But, that's depending on your grade level where you do that at. So we kind of simplified at the bottom. Once we got our total answer, we simplified and got 3/16.
So that area model worked pretty good. So we're going to say that Casey we could say that Casey was the regular ed or special ed teacher. It doesn't matter. Was you a regular ed or special ed teacher?
I was a regular ed teacher.
So you was a regular ed teacher. So she probably taught math?
I taught
Yeah.
middle school math.
So let's say, so Casey's the math teacher, and she understands this model conceptually, right? And she can build this model. So this is a semi-concrete model, right? Because it's a picture. So it's not the concrete representation of that. But we gave that instruction to whole group. So I modeled one, and then Casey got up and she modeled one, and then you would go ahead and you would practice the rest of those answers, right? So you'd keep continuing to practice. Well, I know the cloud group, we were still having trouble. So we're going to move to manipulative, and we're going to use another manipulative, which was hard, right? So you guys care to talk a little bit about what happened over here in your alternative group? And it's okay to you want the microphone?
No.
You don't need it? No, I heard you, look.
One thing that we kind of talked about is that with so many manipulatives, it's very easy to get overwhelmed. And then when you get overwhelmed, your kids will feed off that, and then everybody's mad at each other, and nobody's getting the right answer. But once you break down how the manipulatives work, they work. And it just takes practice.
Could you explain what we used over there?
We used, so it's little foam pieces that break up into different fraction sizes. This is your whole, and then these were your halves, and you would just build up until you filled your whole. So it would fit like this for half. So your whole is the bottom one, and then you take the others and you build on top of them until you fill the blue. And that helps give you your fraction because each one's like a different color. Like this is 1/10. This is 1/5. So you go until you can figure out how many of each one it takes.
Right. So you reduce that fraction by, you figure out how many it takes to match that because you're looking for that same common denominator, right? So you build that model. So that's when we moved to that very concrete. Even though we tried to work through that a little bit. It was a little productive struggle over there trying to solve those problems. But we transfer that the kids that need the extra help, right? We move them to that other group, and we give them one more scaffold. Right? We give them one more. So we moved the learning from that semi-concrete that you were doing building the area model. They needed that extra help, right? And it doesn't mean that it's always IEP kids. It could be any of our kids who need those conceptual models, right? You got to see it and touch it and feel it and work in it and productively struggle through it. But that's how you could do that. So very simply, we didn't add more problems or do anything different, but the whole group continued to work with the regular ed teacher, and then the small group moved with the special education teacher, right? And so we retaught that lesson using those models. So it was just 4 or 5, 3 or 4 kids. It's going to be a different number, right? But you can real quickly go back and you could reteach that.
So did that look like this? Just
Uh-huh. Yeah, if you want to show them, you care to show them one of those models? All right, so she can show you a model.
So you're one whole.
Yeah.
And then you just take and you just stack until you get.
Right.
So it's the same thing on paper. You're just taking it and turning it into a manipulative.
So why did you put 1/2 on there though? Oh, you did a whole new problem.
Because it was a problem. Yeah, we did the problems on the other side of the paper.
Okay, I was thinking.
Yeah, we had different problems.
We had different problems.
Sorry, I could have started with that.
Yeah, right. So you know how on your paper,
They're 1/2 for, okay.
so on your paper you had clouds and stars, and I asked you guys to do the stars, and the other kids did the clouds. So they did the clouds,
I'm like, where in the?
right?
I really threw it for a loop.
Yeah. Well, that was a good question. But now thinking about that, so we already had the numbers, the problems were already there. So the whole group needed, that concept, that semi-concrete model. And the whole group had that instruction. But the kids that were continuing, or the clouds, not kids, but clouds back here, the clouds that were still needing some more help, we were able to move them there, right? So it was pretty quick. You never done that before. We figured it out. Casey's she'd never seen this lesson before either, right, until we talked about this. I mean, you may have done it before, but we were not prepared for
I
that.
didn't teach fifth grade. So
Yeah. So very quickly we transferred, right? And we were able to use your teaching skills in order to be able to deliver that content. I'm just going to say I struggled over here in the small group building those models because I don't think that way. You know why I don't think that way? Because I never needed to do it, right? But there's so many kids that need that concrete model and we forget that step. We've learned differently. I learned to multiply, find a common denominator. Well, it was complex to me, and I'll show you guys kind of a part of that. But I found it quite complex to figure out. I'm going to borrow this one. Right one. So I look at this, for example, if I'm taking that whole, and my first problem was 2/5, I had to figure out 2 out of the green, and the green are fifths, right? So that 5 pieces make the whole. So you're matching those, but you're touching those. You also then have to take the purple, which is what, a 1/10? Is that what it was? A 1/10. And you have to figure out which way they'll fit. So we tried every way we could to turn them sideways. Well, they didn't fit sideways. So we turned them this way. Right? So I build this model this way. So how many do I have now? I've got 4. And how many would it take to build the whole thing? It'd be 10, right? So I got 4/10. How does that reduce? 2/5. 2/5, right? So that's how I built that, right? We go back to, there's 2/5, right? But anyway, they build the model. They build those, and they have to figure out how to reduce it. So if I try a third's not going to work. I have to try a 4th. I have to try a 5th. And pretty soon you get good enough at them. But when you touch those or build those models from that, then that allows you to solve those problems. Right? So it gives them, some kids need to see that. And we don't always think about it. And that's why it's uncomfortable when you do that lesson. You know, it's hard to figure them out. And we did struggle back there. So anyway, but the idea of it is that you can see that model about what does that look like when I do that alternative. What is that next level that I need to teach them of a scaffold? And that's what we do. We teach that, this is what we do. We touch them. We make that a concrete model. Right, and you can see on the PowerPoint slide, these are fraction strips right here. So these are free. I just took a picture of them. You can go online and get these free. You don't even have to have the little foam ones, but they're the same thing, right? You can just print those off and have them. So most of the things that we do and we talk about with our instruction, we can find and we can have access to. All right, any other questions or thoughts about alternative teaching? Any aha? The area model?
Well, yeah, that helped too, because I don't do fractions or
Yeah.
math in general, but I was just talking about how you just folded the paper
Yeah.
in half and made it 2 different lessons.
Yeah, because we're not practicing, we're practicing mastery. We're not practicing how many, right? But we're practicing mastery. Yeah, so it's easy to pick it up and, you can pick it up. Casey picked it up and ran with it immediately. You know, it don't have to be a ton of planning. We didn't have any planning, did we? We didn't plan this. It was not planned. We had no meetings, did we? You all didn't know you was going to be a cloud till you opened your paper.
I think doing more even distribution could have helped.
Uh-huh.
Too, and I know you didn't plan it this way.
Right.
But that way it gives you more over here to where you can have that discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Say, okay, well, I can't get it to fit this way, but maybe you can get it to fit that way.
Mm-hmm. And if you wanted to split the group, you could do parallel teaching that way, right? You could do it that way. Yeah, you can, the distribution you can change. There's no rule about how many you have in that small alternative teaching group. You can have a different number. Some days you're going to have 7 kids, right? And some days you're going to need 2 or 3. 2 or 3 kids are going to need. It's going to vary based on what you're teaching. All right, so I'm going to let everybody kind of go back to their seats for a second, and then I want you to, before we go on to another section, I want you to take another minute to just think about one thing that we're going to talk about from each co-teaching model that we've talked about so far. Because what we teach is that we teach kids that we want to allow them time to process and think about what they've learned. So we're going to do the same thing as adults because we need to process and think about what we've learned so far. So I'm going to ask you, I don't care if you put it on a Post-it note, on a scrap piece of paper, on the back of something, I want you to just list one thing in each one of those co-teaching models that you want to try or you want to practice. Just take 1 minute and try it. We got a little discussion on here. It was very good. It was good discussion. Okay, what did you guys, anybody want to talk us, what about station teaching? What's good? What are you going to try? Everything? I love station teaching.
I really like the idea of being able to do it with fewer stations because, always before it seemed like we had so many stations that we would get bogged down in planning all the stations and then trying to circulate ourselves around to monitor all the different stations. But if we do it with fewer stations and we stay with specific stations, then I think we'll be more productive.
You can. So, like we talked about a vocabulary station. Well, maybe the special ed teacher teaches at the vocabulary station. So when they cycle through with station teaching, they are working on the vocabulary and the regular ed teacher's working on the standard, the main idea or supporting details or central ideas or whatever. So another thing that you can do on station teaching is the teachers can move and the kids stay. So we had a classroom that was jam-packed with high school students and we wanted them to do co-teaching. We asked them to co-teach and they said, "You're crazy. We can't do it. There's no room. We have these huge big high school boys in there. There's no way that's not happening." And so we said, well, you got to figure it out. Let's figure out a way. How can it happen? And so what they figured out is, you can imagine those big high school boys, they were big, tall, big boys. They couldn't move around that room, or they'd run over each other, or they'd run over the little ones, or whatever. But the teachers started moving. So they put the kids in a group, and then the teachers moved to different stations. So that's why you'll see these little things like this right here. The teacher moves, right? I got all my station teaching stuff that I'm going to teach it and use in here. I've got my tape, and I got my paper clips, and I've got my scissors. I've got my fishing line. You just never know what you might need. So the teacher can move. So you don't have to do it just the way it says in exactly. You can move as the teacher. You can see my parallel teaching tubs. I love my tubs. I carried them everywhere I went when I was a special ed teacher. I carried them everywhere. Had all my stuff in them. I got real fancy one time. I had to put them on a cart and I could roll them, right? So you know how that is, getting them moving around. But the thing about it is you can do that, right? The teachers can move around. So those kids didn't have to move around because we couldn't move those big boys. And that room was jam-packed. I don't know how they got 32 kids in there. Big kids. I don't know how they got them in there. So they couldn't do parallel teaching really as well, so they decided to do stations. And so they just grouped the kids. They put their seats in a group, and then the teachers moved around. Easy solution, right? Somebody thought of that because we said, let's try it. How are we going to do it? Their district committed to co-teaching, and we had to figure out a way, and that's how we figure out a way. We do it that way. So there's all kinds of things. And the thing you said just now about having 3 stations, so that's what the research says. Do 3 stations. Do a teacher station for the regular ed teacher, a teacher station for the special ed teacher, and then an independent station. And the independent station has to be something that they've already learned. Because you know what happens if you don't?
Amok.
That's right.
They run amok.
Right. They lay over there like this with their hand on their head, right on their desk. Y'all seen? And that's the thing. You got to keep trying it because it will. It takes a little while to kids to learn the routines and the procedures with it. It does. It takes a little while, but that's good. Yeah. So there's ways to do that. But that independent station. I used to use an instructional assistant. She was the finest lady in the world, and I could give her the station work. And she would do it every single day. So while I was rotating kids out, because I was a special ed teacher at that time, and I had an instructional assistant in my room. And there would be times when I would have 3 grade levels in my room trying to teach them. And I could move them, I would group them by what I was working on with their IEP goal. And then she would take a station, and she could facilitate that station as good as anybody. And so that was another way to do it. And then we did the computer station, but that was before we had so much technology. We also could use a library station. We did all kinds of different things. So but anything on that 3rd station, you want it to be something that they can do independently. Otherwise, they'll drive you nuts asking you a million questions, right? Because if they can't do it on their own, it kind of defeats the purpose. So that was another mistake I made. when I first started doing stations is the task was too hard for them to do independently. So you have to think about that too. Any other questions? All right, what about parallel teaching? What's good?
You can catch up those kids that maybe aren't getting it as quickly as all the other kids. You can make sure they stay. Yeah.
So you can catch them up and you can give them it's kind of a smaller group and you can kind of catch them up. You're talking about with the parallel? Yep. So you can take parallel and you can give them, you could do like we taught with alternative teaching. You could give them extra manipulative. Some groups might need a little bit more. Some of them might need a calculator, right? So you can still teach the same thing, get them caught up, figure out an extra scaffold that they could use in there. Anything else?
Your parallel teaching, you're also taking strength of your two different teachers. They're not going to teach the same.
That's right.
And as long as they teach the same content at the same rigor,
That's right.
that's your goal.
Right. Just like Faith and Sam did this morning, right? They taught the same exact thing.
And it gives you leeway that if I'm not getting it with Sam and Sam sees Casey's not getting it, let's maybe try to do, switch
That's
the
right.
group.
Yeah, and you can flip teachers. It's real easy, right? You can flip those
Flip the
teachers.
kid or whatever.
Yeah, because you're going to learn which one works the best. And, it's always about solving a problem. So our math consultants solve problems using these area. I never would have thought of that to build that model. I would have never done that. And so you need those other people that are experts or that have skills in those areas. So that is a good
With
thing.
your math, a lot of your math standards, it's the same concept, but they want you to do it several different ways.
That's right.
Your area model, thinking about multiplying, your area model, your partial products. And so you can do parallel, so you could, teach, that way you're in a small group and you're teaching this strategy to this group, this strategy to this group, and then switch them.
Yep. So there's multiple ways you could do that. You could have different manipulatives. Like I said, the semi-concrete and those concrete manipulatives. It's a good way to balance that. All right, what's good about alternative teaching? What do y'all think is good about alternative teaching?
I think it's good that you can reteach something but not the whole class.
Yeah.
And you can add an extra layer to help those, whether they're special ed or regular ed, that need that extra boost in understanding. I thought that was really neat about the alternative teaching.
Yeah. Right, because it's not always the special ed kids. It could be whoever's struggling, right? Whoever's. You like the pre-teaching?
I thought about that too, because if you have students that have a lot of prior knowledge of something and then you just have a small group that doesn't, you can pull that small group for the alternate teaching and give them that background that they need to fully understand, or
Absolutely.
to better understand.
That's right. We're faced with that loss of learning in some situations still, right? We're still feeling the implications of that loss of learning. And those are ways that we can real quickly get those kids who need that. Not everybody needs it. That's another way to do that too. But you can pre-teach that or get them ready for that, or catch them back up either way. Yep.
Could you use that too as an enrichment?
Yep.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So that same math lesson, for example. So we did the area model. We took the fraction strips. How would you extend that for your gifted kids? What would we do for them?
Could you let them come up with their own ways of solving this?
They could build the models. They could demonstrate the models, right? They could peer teach. There's a lot of things we could do to extend it and not give them more problems, right? We don't want to just give them 20 more problems to solve. But how could they do it? They could build those models. They could help. Like you said, they could peer teach. They could help build those models, right? We teach them one time, they can use them, and they can help. And they can be enriched that way. Yep. Or they can think about how that, if they're by those gifted kids are probably, they're very abstract. They can see it without having to touch those things, right? So they can even move that a little farther. How does that apply? How do you use that fractional part when you're building something, right? When you're talking about fractions. My husband my husband's a math teacher, special ed teacher, and he's a retired math teacher. And so I would do measuring on the number line. I'd measure, 1/2 and 3 marks, right? I'd measure 1/2 and 3 marks. You ever done that when you tape measure something? It's 1/2 and 3 marks. And it would drive him insane, right? He had to teach me fractions. It drives him insane. I've learned them since then, but it about drove him insane that I'd say 1/2 and 3 marks. And he would finally gave me that lesson. But the point of it is, we have to learn how does that apply in real life and how can we use that? So that would be a good opportunity for enrichment for kids too, to build it, like measure something and then apply that. We're talking about those fractional parts or something.
You could apply this to like a recipe
Yep, you could do, yeah, so there's all kinds of fun things kids could do, creative. They could do some experiments for science to enrich some of those things, rather than working more problems.
For an ELA, like, it could be an opportunity for those kids who are ready for like a deeper discussion.
That's right.
The example that came to mind is like when you're talking about identifying central idea. When they've got that, then you can pull your kids that are ready for that and discuss, well, okay, well, how do you know just by looking at this, how do you know that this is a central idea? Or why do you think that the author would choose to make this a central idea?
And you go much deeper. What was the author's underlying purpose? Why did they really write this? Because, we don't ever get to that sometimes, right? We can sometimes just get through those, understanding those concepts, but to really dig deeper. And if you've read, I always think about Hatchet, right? We talk about the development of a character over the course of a text, and that's the skill that we're trying to learn and teach through there. But what is it about him? What's his maturity, and how has he developed? Right? Those are deeper conversations that we don't always get to, that kids could get to, those higher level thinking. All right. Any other thing? Okay. Let's go ahead and get to this next part. We're going to talk about specially designed instruction. We've been going about how long? Y'all need a break yet?
Get out early, right?
We'll keep on keeping on. We'll keep working. Let's keep working. Okay, let's keep working. We'll take a break in a few minutes. Now we figured out how to co-teach. Now the other part of that is the specially designed instruction. So we're co-teaching. We have students in our classroom that have an IEP that say they get co-teaching as a service. They have goals, and then they get specially designed instruction. They get something special. How do we make that happen? So we think about it. How do we make that specially designed instruction happen? So there's a lot of confusion about what specially designed instruction is versus what's accommodations and modifications. So accommodations and modifications, accommodation is getting those kids access, right? Remember, we were talking about the access. That's a reader. That's somebody to help them scribe. But how do we teach them? What instruction do we teach them in order to get them closer to that grade level standard? So it's more about the teaching. It's the method we do. And so we talk about it. All of our kids have an opportunity, regardless of their disability, they can learn. And I hope that we believe that that's the case for that. So there are ways that we can adjust that, right? We can adapt we can adapt through content, through the methods, through the way we deliver those things. Because when we think about individualized instruction, it starts with the needs of one child. So we're only thinking about one child. So sometimes when we plan lessons, we don't think about just that individual student. We think about what does the class need. But when we get to that specially designed instruction and we're trying to meet that kid's need through and their goal and what the instruction we're supposed to be delivering, we have to think about that child. Because it could look different, right? For every kid in there, you may have 5 or 6 students that have a disability, that have an IEP in your classroom. So we have to think about what is it we can do to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all those kids. That's why co-teaching is so effective, is because we can do that. We can reduce we can reduce our group size. We can do that through teaching them in those smaller groups. We can pre-teach them, right? Because some specially designed instruction says I'm going to pre-teach them. Well, what does that mean? Well, that might mean I use the alternative teaching and I teach them some of those things before we start that lesson. And so we have the specially designed instruction handbook, and that one is one that you guys have seen probably if you're special education teachers, but we use this one all the time, and it's not been updated in a little bit, and I know they're working on that. I believe, right, Brenda, they're supposed to be updating this one. But we're talking about this IEP lesson plan development. And so we see these things that are specially designed instruction, and we say, what are those things? What's the difference between giving them a kid accommodation, modifying a test, or then teaching them? And that's what we're talking about. Accommodations, getting them access. Modifying is we're changing it up a little bit. And that's when I was telling you about that social study teacher that all year long she's marked out 2 on the test. And that's how she modified her test. We never did get to 4 answers. We never did. Until we got to the assessment. And then we said, surprise, you have to do all 4. And so, that's if we modify, how do we modify? And how do we modify that because the intention is what? What do you think the word is here? What's the intention when we do these things? It starts with a L. Learning. I heard it. Learning, right? That's the whole point. We're learning. We want kids learning. We want them to always be learning. And when we're teaching them, we have to teach them in a way that they learn. And so here's another one. This is another great book. You guys got the co-teaching and the SDI book. And that's a great book, The Specially Designed Instruction. So it talks about how do we do that special? What do we do for those kids? And guess what? The specially designed instruction helps all kids. What we do for special ed kids will help all kids. What we do for all kids, does it always help special ed kids? No. Not necessarily. Yeah, that's right, because it's true, right? It's true. So what we do for special ed kids can help all kids, but what we do for all kids might not be special enough for our kids with disabilities, right? So that's how we think about it. So what we know to be good strategies are going to be good strategies, and I'll tell you how I have figured this out. I'll tell you another story. But I was working with my daughter, and I can't even remember what the strategy was at that time, but I had been working with that third grade class. I was still pretty young when I had her, when I was teaching, and she was in school, and we were trying a strategy. I can't even remember what strategy was, and she's a good student. So I thought, well, this is a strategy I know works for this particular activity, and we tried it, and it worked. And I said, it worked. It didn't always work. Right when I was in the resource room, I would try that with some of the kids, and it didn't work for those kids. But I tried that strategy, and it worked for her. So what we know is the instructional strategies are good. They're good for all kids. But sometimes we have to change them for our students with disabilities because those don't work. Right? But we have to say, oh, it does work. We have to believe that those will work, and we have to try those. And we can't keep doing the same thing over and over, and that's what happens a lot of time, right? We keep doing the same thing over and over because that's what we know to do, and we're not really getting the different results that we expect for that. So. It is the definition of insanity. All right, so, yeah. And we do that sometimes, don't we? We kind of just, we do. Yeah. That's how it's working for my diet plan, just for the record. Right? It's not working out. I keep doing the same thing, and I keep thinking thin, and it's not working out. So anyway, let's talk about specially designed instruction. So how do we adapt content? How do we change our teaching method? And then how do we deliver instruction? So some of the things we've done today are already ways to think differently about how we just deliver instruction, right? Just that lecture type instruction doesn't work for all of us, especially our students with disabilities. So we think about how those times how we engaged differently, and how do we get kids access to the general curriculum. So I know Kyle talked a little bit about students with vision problems, or we talk about kids with hearing problems. We talk about kids who have cognitive deficits and they have problems with memory, right? They have, their working memory is low. How do we help those kids? How do we help kids who have time, they need processing time, right? They have processing speed issues. So though we're thinking about it, how do we do that? So how do we design that, and how do we make sure we get them access? And it's not just differentiating, it's not just accommodating, and it's not just modifying. So this is really the teaching and the learning that happens. And so we talk about the content. So the content's what we have to teach as teachers, and that's the Kentucky Academic Standards. So we can't change that, right? We have to teach that. That is what is bound by our obligation to teach students, and that's the governing body that says we have to teach our standards. But we can change how we deliver that, right? Our method might be co-teaching. It might be explicit instruction. It might be scaffolded instruction or direct instruction. It might be that we chunk pieces of information together. It might be that we model. It might be that we use multisensory. So the way we teach can be very different, and we can adapt that, right? Thinking about back over here, this chart over here, I forgot where we put it, right here. The sketch in chunks. Remember that strategy we talked about when you went through the reading stations? So that one is chunking information. So we could be teaching kids that, right? So when we're talking about chunking, we're talking about taking a little bit of information and letting kids process it. A little bit of information and letting kids process that, right? That's part of specially designed instruction. That's what it looks like. That's what it looks like and can be in that classroom, is that we just take a little bit and we let them process it. Sometimes when we are going through that planning process and we're thinking about how to teach kids, that's just one of the things we select. We don't really use it, right? That happens sometimes. That's not one of the strategies that we use. But if you've got a kid that's got a memory issue, you want to chunk information, right? You want to break that down into smaller chunks. So that's how we teach them. So if we're thinking about those things when we plan and design our lessons, right? Just like we did that scaffolded instruction at that station, that reading station, they could draw a picture. So those kids that cannot write all of that, or they need to describe, they could draw that picture. They could talk about what they read in that first paragraph and then draw an image of that. That is perfectly okay, right? That is very explicitly, we're teaching them at strategy. So that's explicit instruction. Then that's allowing them to chunk that information. We might build a model. So those are always, we say those words, but I don't know if we really understand and think about what that looks like in the classroom, right? Because sometimes we just talk about it, but we don't get time to dig in there and think about what it looks like in practice. The same thing for multisensory, right? Being able to do the science lab, right? To dig in there. I don't know how that worked out for y'all with your tongs and trying to free the animals out of the seawater, right? From all the debris. Or the topographical map that Will had over here where we could feel it and touch and see where that area was at. But those are all things about the method, the way we teach kids. And then the delivery, right? Those are how we deliver it. We do that pre-teaching. We do that explicit model. We use those scaffolds. We use those groups. So there's all kinds of ways that we can approach that. And so we're going to talk about one, and I'm going to use a reading example. But we start when we do this work with the Kentucky Academic Standards, right? That's where we start. Even whether they have an IEP or not, we start with the standards, and that's what we're required to teach. Then we have to take that standard and then turn that into learning intentions or targets, right? That's what we're calling them. I think we're calling them learning intentions right now. I just left the word target because sometimes some people still reference it that way. So let's do a practice. All right, and I think a lot of people here were high school, so I selected a high school example. So here's the standard. Here is the students have to determine a central idea of text. And they analyze that development. And they cite specific textual evidence. And they have to have a summary, they paraphrase, and direct quotations to support. So if you look at this progression, you'll see that 8th grade, that's the Reading for Information standard. 8th grade, standard 2. Right, so this is what they got to be able to do in 8th grade. Then in 9th and 10th grade, this is what they have to be able to do. And then it gets a little bit harder, right? Because the whole time we're moving kids through that cognitive demand. We're making them do a little bit more for every grade level, right? They have to think a little bit more. They have to know and be able to do a little bit more. So we're asking them to be able to do a central idea, right? So if we're going to pick it, let's take 9th grade. Let's take 9th and 10th. How many people are high school in here? I forget. How many? All right, let's do high school. Let's do 9th grade. So we got central idea of text and analyze that text in detail and how it developed over the course of the text. Remember we talked about that a bit ago with our other reading passage and how things are shaped, how they're redefined by details in that text. So you see it's pretty hard, right? What do they have to do in 9th grade that they didn't have to do in 8th grade?
Their development over the course of a text.
Okay. Right, so that's all the way, like I was talking about when I did that book, Hatchet. He changed a lot. So Brian was a very young, immature young man. His parents were going through a divorce, and he was going to go stay with his dad, right? Plane crashed. He's there, and all he had was the hatchet. But what happened to him all through the course? What happened to Brian through the course of that text? So kids have to be able to understand that. How did he change? There's a lot of maturation that happened for him, right? And they have to understand. That's pretty hard. That's pretty intense stuff for kids to be able to think through, right, and think about. All right, so that's what we're asking them to do, to be able to think about that text and how that changes over the course of it. Now, what do they have to do in 11th grade?
2 ideas. And they have to talk about how they interact.
Right, so it gets a little bit harder. How do those concepts around, the maturation and what else is happening with his family, or are there other dynamics that are happening over that? So you see it kind of gets harder and harder and harder. So for today's purposes, we're going to go with the 9th grade example. So how are we going to teach? What are we going to teach right here? If we're going to come up with a learning intention, what are we going to do? What do we have to start with? Well, that's right. So we got to figure out central idea first, right? That's the big thing. So we start with our lesson around central idea. We're probably going to check and see if they can figure out how it. If they can pick out the key details in the text, we might do something along that line. But we're going to be teaching. Yeah, you might have to go back and check, right? That's where you go back to check to see what they know, right? That's where you're doing the little check at. All right, so now we're going to say, they have to know what the central idea is. And they have to do something else. And they have to analyze it. So there's a couple pieces, right? There's a couple pieces of that. So let's say that's our learning intention is the central idea, and then they have to analyze that text, right? So we're talking about the text from what, over the course of that text. So that's pretty complex, isn't it, right? So that's how long is it going to take? How many lessons is that going to be? Yeah, multiple lessons, right? So it could be several lessons. So how might I start teaching that? If I'm a co-teaching team, how might we start teaching that?
We start with teaching like central idea. What is central idea? Take out a note over it.
Yep, right. So you start out, you teach them, you do a whole lesson. You may do a lesson, you do a whole group lesson on what central idea is, and then.
You're going to start out showing them yourself that you can pick it out and how you would determine that. So you're showing them how to do that.
So what we'd say back over here, remember what we just said? Modeling. So that's part of our explicit instruction. We're going to model and we're going to teach them explicitly, right? That's exactly what you're saying we're doing, and that's what we're doing. So that's part of that, right? That's part of that instruction. That's how we design that special. We're very intentional on our examples and our models, right? We're going to model that. Okay, so we're very intentional. Sorry. All right, now what else are we going to do? We're going to build models, but we say specially designed instruction, we're very explicit in that model. So there's all kinds of good ways, but the big takeaway is that you want to make sure that they can analyze, and you also want to make sure that they can get that central idea. I think so. Those are some big pieces of that standard that you're talking about doing. And then you've mentioned a bunch of instructional strategies. Okay, so that's where we're at on there. We have to do central idea, and we have to analyze the text. So let's say we did a lesson, and we taught them how to do central idea, and then we talked about them. What would we use to help them analyze text? If you're talking about analyzing text over the course of a book or a piece of text, how are you going to look at it from beginning to end over the course of time? What are you going to look at? What would you use? What teaching tools might you use?
You could use it.
So in order to plan that lesson, you guys are coming up with some great ideas. So think about that lesson, right? So let's think about it. Here we are. We already you guys have gotten some conceptually some ideas about that. Now, we're going to go to station teaching. We're just going to assume that's what y'all are going to choose, is station teaching, because it's my favorite. It's my favorite. We're going to choose that one right now. Now, so let's talk about, we're talking about, what's the regular ed teacher going to do? What are they going to do during this lesson? Okay, they're going to be introducing the concept. Are you going to have the whole group introduce the concept and the regular ed teacher do that? We're at 9th grade. What do you think? I mean, you can do it a lot of different ways.
Well, it depends on your class, but by 9th grade, I mean, central idea comes from.
So that, yeah, you're right. It's pretty cyclical. So they went over and over. So you may just do a real quick mini lesson or something even, right? There's different ways you can handle it, depending on your kids, right? You got some kids that's got some gaps, and we're going to have to fill them, and you may have to teach them more lesson. You may have a different group, a little more advanced group, right? So you got to have a regular ed teacher. What are they going to do? Because we got a couple of things that we're already working on, right? That central idea, and then we're talking about analyzing text. Who's going to do what? I mean, we could do that, absolutely. So that would be, the special ed teachers working on that central idea. They may have a graphic organizer that they're using, right? They may have one. What if I have a student that has a graphic organizer as part of their specially designed instruction? Right? Because we say use graphic organizers. How are we going to use them? Well, we're going to teach them explicitly how to use a who, what, when, where, and why chart, right? Because I'm asking them to get the main idea. So I might, even in that small group, when those kids rotate through, some of the kids might need that, right? The 5 whys. I give them that scaffold. They can get that SDI while they're moving through that station, right? They may need a little extra. They may need a little bit of the words written in, right? And I know that because we're teaching that, and we know what supports our kids might need. So pretty quickly, we figured out what the regular ed teacher needs to do, what special ed teacher could be doing. Now what we're going to do for the independent station. How do we provide that scaffold for them? That's how we can get that specially designed instruction in that classroom. So it's not that they don't get everything that everybody gets the whole time. They have to have something special, right? Because remember, all kids get core instruction, and then some kids get tiered intervention and differentiation, and then above that is that piece of that specially designed instruction. So our kids with disabilities get all of those layers of those things, right? So they get all of that support. So they get what in addition to that, but you're right, so some of them might need those extra supports. So they can do it a lot of different ways at the independent station. Some people use technology, like, if you've got a iReady, or you do, but thinking about it, one of the things that we've heard recently in the research is talking about the computer-based programs, using it so much all the time. And so that when we think about that cautiously when you use those, because If kids are on the device or computer all the time, how much are we engaging them in that learning? So that's something I'm going to just say caution to. You can use that, and you can monitor how students are progressing if you're using one of those. So I'm not saying you can't use it. I'm just saying, think about how we're using those and how we're collecting that data on it. And are we monitoring to see if kids are advancing, and are they just guessing? I had one student who, he and I would go round and round and round because he'd just guess on everything. We'd go round and round. I said, do it again. We'd do it again. Anyway, we went round, round, round. One day he was, I said, you're going to have to do it again. And his name was Devin. And I said, Devin, you have to do it again. And I said, I'm going to check your score. And you're going to do this again. And I checked his score, and he got like a 98. But those kids are going to be guessing, right? I don't know how he got 98. Probability of a 98 with guessing is, he's good. He's a good guesser. But, so we have to not trust that that's the only way that the instruction's happening when we do that technology. Yeah. So I'd caution about the technology, but I still think technology has a place there. It could be a they can do some vocabulary work. They can do all kinds of things at that independent station. But you see, quickly we come up with a pretty good plan of how we're going to teach that. It might take us 5 days. All right, so what days is the special ed teacher going to be in there? Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 8 to 8:15 to 9:50, right? So what are we going to do during that time? Are we going to give that first delivery of instruction? Are we going to teach central idea, and then we're going to break out into groups? So those are all plans. That's all about how we think and plan. But remember, we're remembering that we have those students that have disabilities in there, and they need specially designed instruction. We have to make sure we're getting that because it's part of that co-teaching, right? It's one thing just to have 2 teachers in there. It's not co-teaching, right? We took that little quiz this morning. It's not co-teaching. So we're going to think about how we're going to do that. And so we're going to talk about that. So we are talking about that, and we're going to do an actual lesson here in just a second. You guys are going to do a lesson in just a second. I'm going to let you all do the thinking about it. But we have to think about that lesson plan. Just like we did this together just now, that was called kind of a we do. That was kind of a model of we all kind of built that together. In the minute, you guys are going to do the we do it part, and you're going to do it on your own. I do, we do, you do part. Right? So you guys are going to design your own lesson. But that's what we have to think about. What is it that we're going to evaluate? What are we looking at? What is it the regular ed teacher needs to make sure happens? What does the special ed teacher need to make sure happens? Right? That goes back to right here. Are we going to use the goals graphic organizers? Are we going to teach the kids how to use them? Are we going to pre-teach those kids vocabulary? I might do a lesson on fractions and show them how to use those models. Right? We just give them that pre-teaching. So how are we going to do that? How do we make that happen in that lesson? All right, so we're going to get ready to do that. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to let you, how many people are here with their team? Are you guys a team? All you guys are a team? You guys a team here? You guys a team? Okay. And you guys over here a team? Or you guys, you can be a team for today. And you guys be okay to be a team? So I'm going to ask you to do this. I'm going to let you plan a lesson. So one of you decide, because we're getting ready to start school in a few weeks, right? So if you already know what you're teaching, I want you to think about, you can get your phone out, you can look up the standard, you can think about your progression document, but I want you to pick a standard. I don't care if it's reading, math, science, or social studies, but I want you to pick a standard. I want you to talk about that learning intention, and then I want you to plan a lesson of what that is going to look like if you teach that lesson. And I want you to talk about what the regular ed teacher is going to do and the special ed teacher is going to do. So this is kind of your thinking about I'm going to give you all some time to do that. Now, I'm going to let you choose. Do you want to do a station teaching? Do you want to do alternative teaching lesson? Or do you want to do a parallel teaching? And I'm going to ask you can come up, when you decide, then you come up, one person from your group come up and get the lesson planning template to do this, and then you can go back, and I'm going to give you time to work. So if you need to go get you a drink and go to the restroom and then come back, we're going to work till about probably, I'll say let's work till about 2:10. What time is it? Yeah, it's about 15 till. So I'm going to give you, let's check at 2 o'clock and see where we're at on our lesson. So if you want to get a drink, come up and get your lesson plan, decide what you're going to teach at your table, and you're going to write your own lesson. 15 minutes. I'm going to ask you to find the person who has the next birthday at your table. Identify that person who's got the next birthday. All right, August. Okay, so raise your hand if you got the next birthday. So hold your hand up. Raise your hand if you got the next birthday. Is it you? All right, listen. So if you got the next birthday, you're holding your hand up. Point at whoever you want to be the spokesperson at your table. Go ahead, you get to choose. Yeah, that's what happens when you step out of the room. Not me. My daughter, those kids taught me this. That means not it. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not fast. You do. All right. So, all right, we're going ahead and we're going to share lesson plans. We want to hear the great ideas we have for lesson plans. So we're going to share. All right, Kyle, you go first. Like for the next day. Yeah. Okay. So that was a couple different examples, 7th grade and 8th grade ELA. And so we talked about what the regular ed teacher's going to do, what the special ed teacher's going to do. The 8th grade, when I thought that was really good, thinking about that vocabulary, because that whole station could be vocabulary, and thinking about how important vocabulary is instruction, and that complex, right? It's very complex. So if you're co-teaching, you're thinking about some of that, if you're thinking about domain-specific vocabulary, even how important that is to let kids have that experience with that vocabulary. So that's a great station. That was good, and I like that you planned your assessment and how you're going to assess students, and then disability. So if you're thinking about the models that you're teaching, so you talked about the stop and chunk, I think instead of sketch and chunk, so she's selected an instructional strategy. So what are we doing? If that's part of specially designed instruction, what are we doing? Remember some of those things we talked about? It's chunking information, right? So you're stopping. So if you have a student that has specially designed instruction, and part of one of their things is in order to access the curriculum is to be able, you teach them how to chunk information. Well, stop and chunk is a strategy, right? It's an evidence-based strategy. So you're using an evidence-based strategy. So that's when it becomes that when we have to think about what is that specific evidence-based strategy that we're using to teach those kids. And that's, again, moves from giving them accommodation, if we just give them a graphic organizer, if we just give them a sketch, stop and sketch, or if we teach them how to do stop and sketch and use that graphic organizer so they can do that all the time. They can transfer that learning, right? So that's good. All right. Anybody, how about here? Anybody else at the table? Did you have one? All right.
She's the co-teacher.
So you were, okay, so you did one for each grade. Okay, perfect. All right, you guys get to pass you got this table back here, this one here, and this one back here. So if you're talking about solving one-step equations, so that was one of your stations that teachers are doing that. So thinking about that, thinking about how you integrate that specially designed instruction. So what are some of the things that kids might have in that specially designed instruction? Solving one-step equations might be, they might have a little thing about what's a strategy used for solving one-step equations. Like they may have a procedure, like step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, write a little card on their desk, or that they can use a visual that shows them this is what you do first, and then second, and then third, and then like cue cards, right? So cue cards could be something, right? Yeah. Right. So, but thinking about those, so if students come to your, students can have those scaffolds. That's how we get that specially designed instruction in when we're teaching those lessons. So if you're doing that one-step equation, you can have a little example of those, right? You could have, if you're thinking about the FOIL method, have let them see, have a diagram on their, that they use when they come through that station. So that's how you integrate those scaffolds. So they get those things that are additional, that's special to them, that they need. They might get their calculator, right? But we're going to teach them how to use that, but then we're teaching them how to use those strategies. Or we might give them a sheet that has their, I was trying to think about all the different kinds of math, the models that they could have like a picture of, right? If you're talking about things that are inverted, or if they have an image of things that like parallel and perpendicular and those kinds of things, that they have some of that vocabulary, that language, or they have their vocabulary they can bring, or their vocabulary notebooks, right? That's another specially designed instruction that they could use at that station.
Some of them will have multiplication tables.
Some of them will have multiplication. Yeah.
You're talking about very basic one-step equations.
That's right. So they may have those, and they could use those. But you use those at those centers, at those stations when the kids move through, and that's how you get that specially designed instruction. So when you plan your lessons, you have to think about what is it that all kids need, what's the standard, how do I break that standard down into skills, and then how do I teach that skill, and how do I have both teachers teaching, and then how do I bring in that specially designed instruction for those kids. So it's not that hard, because you all did it in 15 minutes, right? You all come up with those ideas in 15. It was, you did a good job. You can do it. You can do it. You did. Sometimes we make things more complex too, don't we? I mean, I get round and round on something sometimes, and I'll make it very complex. when it's really, we just have to kind of, real quickly, because you guys done a fantastic job, by the way. Just for the record, all those that volunteered today and all this work that you've done a fantastic job. And look how well you did that quickly. You're good at it. You already know your craft very well. You're good at what you do. You jumped right in there. You could teach lessons. You could design lessons. So it's just taking that minute, just that pause and say, okay, how do we break that down? How are we going to teach that? How are we going to work together? And how are we going to make it better? Because remember, what's the whole goal is for our students is for learning, right? That's it. That's what we want. We want them learning. We want to get them, move them as far as we can. So you did a great job. So you ought to give yourself a round of applause because everybody done a fantastic job today. You guys have been on task in a long day. So guess what? We're going to go here. And we got any questions before we go? Because I'm going to let y'all out because y'all skipped your break and quit lunch early, so I'm going to let y'all go. What questions do you have? Any other questions? All right. If you don't care to give me some feedback for today's session, how we can improve it or make it better, or if you learned something from it today, hopefully you learned something. If you'll give me that feedback, you can collect. Oh, I forgot. I have something for you. Oh, yeah. Chastity over here, our Vanna, has everybody. We have a tub. If you want a station tub for everybody that came today, you may have a station tub, just like my station teaching tub, my handy dandy station teaching tub. So you all can have one of these to take to your classroom.
Can we take on the ink pens too?
You may have your ink pen too, Kyle.
Oh, no, I was just carrying my ink pen.
So once you finish that, if you want one of those things to put your stuff in, Chastity's got them over here, and y'all can do that, and I'll get out of the way so y'all can do your feedback. And thank you very much for being fantastic.